Bring back an eagle photo from your You should rotate pictures on a regular basis. That would be fine, for a variety of purposes. That's a fun suggestion, CAC had.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's a nail biter all over.
silly that in Mona they'll say call to order, because here you are all so quiet. Here you go. Call to order the Board of Managers, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District meeting for January 29th, 2015. Is there anyone here, a member of the public, who wishes to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda or that's on the consent agenda? I see no hands. Next item is approval of the agenda, and there are a few changes. The first is that item 5.1, which is the information item regarding the Zumber Ridge Homeowners Association correspondence, will be moved to 13.2 for discussion because there are some new developments. And then under 9.1, board updates. Oh, I was going to ask Manager Olson, who's not here, if he wanted to give an update on the boat manufacturer. So if he arrives, I might add that back in if he's interested. Under 9.2, upcoming meetings. On February 12th, 6 p.m., prior to the workshop, there will be an executive committee meeting. And under board discussion items at 13.3, there will be an update on AIS, or a discussion of AIS legislation. Are there any other changes people would like to have on the agenda?
Move approval of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The next item of business is the election of board officers.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Shackleton.
I would like to just move slate on current officers.
Manager Brooks.
I believe it's in our bylaws that we can't do the elections unless we're all present.
It's not in our bylaws, though I know it's been a custom frequently. Perhaps we can move it to later in the agenda and see if we have a
That'd be fine.
larger number of people. Would there be an objection?
Withdraw my motion.
All right, thank you. We'll write that down.
Excuse me.
Yes,
Do you think it's in the bylaws?
it's not.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Okay. Just, okay, thank you.
No, I checked that. It's not. But I have no problem moving that forward the agenda, or backward. Moving down to the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of January 17 special board meeting, approval of the January 15 minutes, and approval of the check registers. For consent items, Resolution 15004, approval of the 2015 depository for financial assurances. Resolution 15-006, approval of the 2015 server upgrades. Resolution 15-007, authorization to enter into a joint funding agreement with the United States Geological Survey for the operations and maintenance of a stage gauge on Lake Minnetonka. Resolution 15-008, approval for Arden Park Neighborhood Cost Share Funding. I have a couple of comments I wanted to make to the January 15 board minutes. I'd like to move those down to 12.1. Any other issues?
What are you moving down?
The January 15th minutes,
Okay.
a couple of small things. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Board updates. As a presence report, I will say that I have attended 2 meetings since the last workshop. They were the Metro chapter of the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts, which I attended with managers Olson and Blixt, and last week's PPC meeting. The next item is the PPC report from a week ago. That's Planning and Policy Committee. Sorry for the abbreviation. And managers Shackleton and Miller were the committee members present last week. And Ms. Christopher is here.
Madam Chair, managers. Just pulled up. So with the kickoff meetings for the comprehensive plan coming up in a few weeks, really the purpose at the committee meeting, and for tonight is just to kind of touch base and,
I don't know why you're so close,
Oh,
but I
sorry.
still can't hear you. If you can put the mic right in front of you or
Sure.
something, that'd be
Yep.
helpful. Thank you.
so yeah, thank you. Purpose is just to kind of touch base and refresh on themes, process, timeline, and also let you know our plan for the kickoff meetings, as far as objectives, format, how we're promoting it. So to start off, we've talked about this in previous meetings, and it was reinforced at the Policy and Planning Committee that the main focus really for this plan update is the implementation model, improving implementation. And so some of the themes tying back to the balanced urban ecology policy are improving effectiveness in service delivery, recognizing social and economic value of water, creating synergy between natural and built environments, and most importantly, improving how district and communities work together to advance each other's goals. And so really the focus for the Planning and Policy Committee and for the advisory committees is around those topics. There will be some technical issues as well to be discussed, but really this is kind of the meat of the process. And so just kind of a simplified version of the flow chart that was in the framework document that's in your Dropbox folder. Really, where we're at right now is kind of building this foundational support through stakeholder engagement. And there was a lot of discussion at the committee meeting about the importance of communication and promoting these meetings and these messages and doing a lot of that work up front. So we're starting off on a good foot. And so really that's where we're at right now, and we won't really move into the plan building until we feel confident that we've got that support and that we're starting off on a good foot. So I'll talk a little more about what we're doing to that end to promote these meetings and try to get people there. But from there, we go into actual plan building and committee meetings. And throughout that process as well, there will be a lot of opportunities for input and a lot of ways that we're touching base and building support along the way. And that'll be through regular reports, comment periods at certain milestones, getting feedback from the committees as we go. And then the hope is that by the time we actually get to review and approval, we've got a good basis. Everybody knows what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we've got their support. So for kickoff meetings, as you know, we've got the two scheduled on the 18th, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. And we are actually planning to add an additional date for those that are not able to attend on the 18th. And that's tentatively scheduled for March 3rd. I'm just waiting on confirmation from the library, but that would be a morning meeting at 8:30 before people really start their day. And so that, I'll send that out once we get confirmation. And the objectives for the kickoff meetings are really to, again, communicate and build support for the process, as well as the focus, the implementation focus, and the themes. And we'll also be using these meetings to solicit interest in serving on the committees and to try to get good representation on those committees. And finally, since we will have the new administrator on board, we'll use it as an opportunity to introduce him and have kind of just a meet and greet, open house kind of setting. And so in terms of meeting format, we plan to start with just kind of a half hour of social time. We'll have displays set up on some of the district projects and programs and really emphasize that partnership message with all of those. There'll be some light refreshments and just, again, opportunity to socialize for a while. Then we'd have some opening remarks and introduction of the new administrator from the president, and hopefully a few comments from Mr. Erdahl. And then we'll have the comprehensive plan presentation itself, keep that to about 15-20 minutes. And we are trying to line up testimonials as well from mayors or administrators as a part of that, just to really, again, tell the story, use some examples that people can relate to. And so in terms of promoting this meeting, getting people to show up, we have the initial mailing that went out with the comprehensive plan brochure. We've also, staff's been making phone calls and using kind of our regular project meetings to talk to people about this, encourage them to attend. And also, if the board is interested in helping us reach out, you can let me know. We do have some talking points prepared, so if you wanted to make any calls to policymakers, we'd certainly encourage that. I've been working with Telly as well, and she is planning to prepare a press release for next week. And we'll be sending email reminders regarding the new meeting dates and just reminders to RSVP. This is kind of a simplified timeline of what you've seen before. Again, kickoff meetings in February. The public opinion survey will also be getting kicked off in February. Henley Rapp is just kind of finalizing the list of questions, and they expect to have the results ready in March. The self-assessment is another piece we'll be kicking off next month. We'll start with kind of the staff piece of it, getting input on what's working, what's not, kind of what the goals and priorities are for the next plan, and then bringing that to the PPC for discussion in April and May. Advisory committee meetings, the policy group and the technical group will be meeting throughout 2015 into early 2016, and those again will be quarterly for the policymakers, probably more like bi-monthly for the technical group, and policy and planning committees will also be throughout that whole period. In the second half of 2015 is when we'll hold kind of the local subwatershed meetings. These are intended to be a little more informal, kind of smaller groups, and we'd also be inviting in lake associations and other interested public to hear about kind of local plans and priorities. Then in the beginning, kind of first half of 2016 is when we'll actually start doing most of the plan drafting and kind of iterative review by the committees, and then move into formal review process in the second half of 2016, and then we've got our ultimate deadline of June 2017 for adoption. So a little bit of space built in there in case things get delayed. So. Lastly, the other item we discussed at the committee was the idea of hiring a comprehensive plan assistant. This would be a 2-year temporary position. Primary purpose is to assist with plan development, stakeholder engagement, policy analysis, research, kind of you name it, taking minutes, sending out notices, helping me stay organized, and then also working to develop our projects database and compile information on progress we've made towards load reduction goals, which is kind of the other side of the self-assessment. And that could be funded out of the comprehensive plan budget. And there was a recommendation provided in the meeting minutes from the policy and planning committee. And that is all I have. I'll take any questions.
Questions, managers? Manager Blixt?
Is there a reason or should we plan on trying to divide up attending these meetings, or should we just among the board members, or should we, I'm just saying, to make sure that we have enough people at them, or?
Ms. Christopher, how do you answer that?
Good question. I would say we'd certainly like managers there. I'm assuming that policymaker attendance will be higher at the evening meeting and the early morning meeting. I think the afternoon one will be mostly staff, which obviously the board is still welcome and encouraged to attend that, but I think particularly I would say to target the evening one in the morning. So yes, we would definitely like to have managers there as much as possible. So if making sure that at least 1 or 2 of you can be at each one would be great.
So we could work on a kind of a schedule or.
Yep.
See what people's
Yeah, we
interests
can follow up
Board enough,
separately.
I think we can go to-
are. Sure. Well,
Or at least I
you're
can.
thinking of as we roll it out.
Well,
Yeah.
but
Put
I'm
that
talking
in.
about these first 3 meetings
Yeah.
specifically,
Okay.
just to make sure that we have some
Right.
people there
Yeah.
of us.
Mhm.
Because I just wanted to make sure that there was coverage.
Very good idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can follow up.
It's so
After-
important
after
nobody
this.
shows up. It's huge.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So how are we going to do that?
Can you, Becky said that she would, Ms. Christopher.
I can
said
follow
she
up
would
with you,
coordinate.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then the recommendation for, that the committee made to add a staff person from the comprehensive plan budget to work on this process, is that something you were hoping that we would do this evening?
Yes.
I guess I'll move that. We had a conversation about what to, how this person would take on responsibilities and kind of the breadth and scope of what it was. And I don't know, Becky, if you'd be willing to speak a little more to it, but it made sense, and it was just given everything that we have going on and what we've laid out to be able to solicit feedback and to be able to incorporate it in a way that makes sense given what we have already in our existing plan. It made sense. It did not seem like it was extravagance. It was a time limited, 2-year. Once this project is done, this is done.
And it's in the
Yeah.
budget. Ms. Christopher.
Yeah, Manager Shackleton managers, I can say a little more about that. I guess basically we feel that a lot of the work that needs to be done could be done by kind of somebody, you know, fresh out of school, looking for experience, where it would be beneficial to them. They'd have a lot of energy to bring to helping us move this along. The alternative would be relying a lot more on consultants, which is obviously a lot more expensive. And it'd be nice to just have somebody right there that we can just be working with on a regular basis and just kind of throw things at at any time. So I think it would just work a lot better.
And the motion of the committee was to direct the district administrator to work with the planning director and operations director in consultation with Springstead to develop a position profile, a salary range, employment term posting for a comprehensive planning system within the established budget.
Second.
Motion is second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Christopher.
Yep.
Manager Blix, I have a few notes about the Metro Bond meeting. Should I start off and see if you want to add anything?
Well,
Divide
yeah,
the task before we started.
Unfortunately, I was sitting next to Bill at the meeting, and he had his little, and he was busy taking.
I know it.
And I leaned over and I said, "Do you got this?" And he said, "Absolutely." And then.
Was he posting on Facebook?
I don't think
So,
so.
I have a few notes myself, and between the two of us, we can
Go ahead and start.
wing it. The date of the meeting, I will just say, was that, such that it was the same date that there was the AIS, meeting up in St. Cloud that was occurring, and so, Ray Bowen was unable to attend, but he sent a report that I'll just pass along since I happen to have it. So you can take a look at, but what he, a couple of things that of note in the report are that the dates for the summer tour are June 24th, and the summer tour will be in Duluth. The annual meeting will be December 3rd. Doesn't say where. I'm assuming it'll be again in Alexandria. And the legislative breakfast will be March 11th, and it will be not at the,
Embassy Suites.
what was the Crown?
The Kelly Inn?
It will not be at the Kelly Inn, it will be at the
Embassy
Embassy
Suites,
Suites.
yeah.
Interestingly enough.
Because of the traffic issues over there, I think.
So I think that's it for that report. I'll just send that around. We had a presentation about the 8410 rule, which is the watershed rule regarding the comprehensive plan that we just heard our report about. There were a number of comments that were submitted as we submitted comments, and that Mr. Hartle from Bowser indicated that he was going to be making some changes based on a number of the comments, and then submitting them to the Bowser board for review sometime coming soon. They would be published. There's a whole big process, as I recall. Maybe Louis knows more than me. It's an extensive process that we're still in for the doing the rulemaking. So, but that rule has not been revised since the dawn of the century, I believe, and so this will be significant once it gets updated. We also had a presentation about groundwater protection strategies from the State Health Department that I will pass along. Oh, along with the summary of changes of the 8410 rule. And so as you are probably aware, the big interest in groundwater all stemmed out of the demise of White Bear Lake. And so that there's a number of things going on with that. Then we had a series of reports from all the state agencies, from the BCA, the DNR, the State Health Department, and Bowser, of which I have no notes. So maybe that's where you can step in. Because Oh, I do know that, because I did start writing this down, Bowser did share with us at the time what they knew about the proposed Clean Water Fund grants that just came out. The notices just came out yesterday, but he did note all the different watersheds in the metro area who were going to be getting funds, of which we're getting about, our watershed is getting about $40,000, I believe. 39 something.
The Mud Lake.
And change, yes.
Mud Lake.
So,
Thank you. A lot of the agency updates were technical matters about their website or rulemaking, and I won't go into detail. But the Administrators Association gave a report also. They have a 6-person executive committee they formed, and they intend to have 3 meetings per year, tying them to the legislative breakfast, the summer meeting, the summer tour, and the annual meeting. That was all I would add to your report.
okay.
The next meeting, of course, will be in April. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is listed in the agenda at 9.2. I've already mentioned that we'll be adding an executive committee on the 12th. And we are now at item 10.1. Mr. Dietrich, this is the public hearing and presentations on permit 14-577. And while Mr. Dietrich is setting up, let me just make preliminary comments. This is a public information meeting. There will be no action taken by the board this evening. This is our opportunity to have the presentation from our staff and professional consultants, and to take any comment, verbal comment from the public. And then we will hold this meeting, the public comment, open for 1 week until 4:30 p.m. on the 5th of February, a week from today, so that anyone in the public who wishes to offer a written comment in whatever form they choose, we can take them to that point. And then the staff will assemble all the questions and comments and responses and bring them to the February 12th board meeting, where we can consider action on the permit. And there is a lot of information here. I know a lot of technical information, so I'm going to make sure that we hold our comments up here at the manager's level to certain points, so we'll talk about what are the good points for us to come in if we have questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd also like to point out that there are 3 opportunities for comment tonight. There are public notice cards or public comment cards over on the counter, and you can submit those into the basket in writing. You may verbally comment, and finally, you can submit any comments in writing until February 5th at 4:30 p.m. Madam President, managers, before the board this evening is permit number 14-577, the Met Council Environmental Services Tunnel Interceptor Improvements Project, located at 3901 Minnehaha Parkway East in the city of Minneapolis, the installation of a tunnel interceptor underneath Minnehaha Creek. This project appears before the board due to state legislation 2001 Chapter 101 regarding the protection of flow to Camp Coldwater Spring. Per our procedural rules, 90 public notice cards were sent out to those who live within 600 feet of the project area, and no requests for a board hearing were received. As you stated, the purpose of this meeting is to gather public comment with the intention of a consultant and staff-based response and all of those questions, comments, and answers will be presented in a matrix to the board when the project comes before the board for consideration. The presentation this evening will cover the project overview and purpose, the rules analyzed with sections for MCWD rules and how they relate to state legislation, and finally a state legislation review that Chris Meehan will go over. As stated, the project is located at 3901 Minnehaha Parkway East, and the project will begin on the west bank of Minnehaha Creek. And the tunnel, indicated here by the red bold line, will cross underneath the creek and continue for 1,000 feet parallel to Minnehaha Parkway East. This figure has been included as a spatial reference, showing that the project area is approximately 1.5 miles northwest of Camp Coldwater Spring. The project, as proposed, will put in a new 1,000-foot sanitary interceptor tunnel, 2 10-foot diameter access shafts, and 1 regulator vault equipped with odor control facilities. Just to point out where these items are, the 2 access shafts, if everybody can see me, one is located on the east end of Minnehaha Parkway next to the roundabout, and the second is off the proposed regulator vault structure here, outlined in this rectangle. And then the new interceptor tunnel will be installed just north of the existing interceptor tunnel. The purpose of the project is to replace aging infrastructure. The current sanitary tunnel and sanitary line were originally constructed in the 1930s, putting their age on the order of 85 years old. The current structural state of the tunnel is unknown, and the current sanitary line is equipped with an old flow control, and basically it is just a concrete weir. And once that tunnel, or once the sanitary line reaches a given capacity, the sanitary overflow is directed immediately to the Minneapolis storm sewer system, which then makes its way to the Mississippi River. The new sanitary line will be installed with a modern flow control system, which will require manual operation and an operator to make a conscious decision to overflow any sanitary discharge into the storm sewer system. Additionally, several alternatives were analyzed against this project. However, the majority posed an unacceptable natural resource risk, with several projects seeking to rehabilitate the existing sanitary line. However, that would require diversion of sanitary flow, and that would be done through pipes, and those pipes would be resting on the surface probably for several months. As a supplemental point, this project was also proposed to address future anticipated EPA regulatory concerns regarding sanitary overflow. The project will be installed first by the installation of the access shafts, followed by the construction of the tunnel interceptor, and finally concluding with the construction of the regulator vault. The construction is anticipated to last 1.5 to 2 years and is slated to begin in June of 2015. The floor of the regulator vault will be within proximity of the Platteville discontinuity, which is a feature that's responsible for the majority of the groundwater flow in the area. And just to give you an idea of what the other features that will be encountered, the vault and the shaft will both encounter the Platteville limestone, while the tunnel will be mainly constructed in the St. Peter sandstone. A comprehensive review of MCWD rules and legislation as they relate to the project was conducted. And a review of the project determined that the erosion control, floodplain alteration, and water body crossing and structures rule were triggered. It is also bound by Minnesota state legislation. And for a legal interpretation of statute as it relates to the project, I'd like to defer to Lewis Smith at this point.
Madam Chair, managers, I think many of you will recall back in 2001, the district was involved in a critical review of the proposed Highway 55-62 interchange, and part of the outgrowth of that discussion and a lot of community interest was action by the legislature, this special law which provides that the district or any other local metropolitan unit of government may not take any action that may diminish flow of water to or from the Camp Coldwater Springs. So at that time, the district's engineer had, along with other consultants, had carefully analyzed the groundwater flow in this interchange area and determined that that project was going to threaten a permanent impact to the flow of the springs. And as a result, the district went to court and got an injunction to stop the construction of that project. Ultimately, the Federal Highway Administration also agreed with the district's engineers, and the project was redesigned. So that was an example of a project that was going to have a direct impact, and based on the analysis of the engineers, would permanently alter the flow to the springs. This project is a mile and a half away, and so we have worked with the staff and engineering team to analyze several different kinds of scenarios that may trigger this law, because it, again, it prohibits taking any action that may diminish the flow. So one scenario we've considered is, as analysis has contemplated, whether there are possible impacts that are very unlikely, but nonetheless conceivable. And our view has been that those very remote possibilities are not a violation of this law. We can talk more about that, but there's legislative history that we have reviewed where Representative Gleason was clear in his comments that the purpose was not to halt all future development of the area, but really to provide for a process for this analysis to provide for protection of the spring from impacts. Secondly, there are the kinds of impacts that the engineers and consultants can foresee as conceivably possible, but they are fixable in a reasonable manner. And so we have identified that just because it is possible to conceive of something happening that may impact the springs, if it is based on the engineering analysis, a problem that is feasible to remedy, that kind of possibility wouldn't prohibit the contemplated action. We've also had a discussion about the impacts that are conceivable, but would be within the range of error of measurement, so that are barely discernible. We've also found those not to violate this provision of law. The last category are the temporary construction impacts that may impact the flow. And our assessment is that there's a good faith basis for determining that those temporary impacts are allowable so long as all of the reasonable construction precautions are taken to minimize them. And so each of these really is an interplay between a technical analysis of what is conceivable and then what this special law provides. So I think with that overview, we can proceed with more of the technical presentation. You may have questions along the way, but I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Teacher.
Thank you, Louis. Madam President, managers, keeping the legislative framework in mind, we'll quickly examine how this project relates to MCWD rules and follow that up with a technical analysis of submittals as they relate to statute by Chris Meehan. For any project disturbing in excess of 5,000 square feet or 50 cubic yards of excavation or fill, they are subject to the district's erosion control rule. Because this project proposes to disturb 1.85 acres, the rule is triggered, and the applicant, as this figure denotes, has provided silt fence, construction entrances, tree protection, inlet protection, and vegetation reestablishment. And also, Brown and Caldwell, who is working with Met Council, have been working with a landscape architect and the park board to formulate a tree replacement plan. The district's floodplain alteration rule is triggered for any project disturbing land area below the 100-year flood elevation for a water body. Because the preliminary construction of the regulator vault and the access shaft on the west bank of Minnehaha Creek will be within this area, the rule is triggered. However, there will be no fill introduced in this area, and therefore compensatory storage is not applicable. The district's water body crossing and structures rule is triggered for any project proposing a structure that will be crossing a water body in contact with the bed or bank. In this particular scenario, the rule language is not clear at what depth that it's no longer considered in contact with the bank, so the rule was analyzed. The applicant has demonstrated the public benefit for the project through the purpose of the project because the sanitary infrastructure does need to be replaced and is aging. The criteria of hydraulics, navigational capacity, and wildlife habitat are not applicable due to the depth at which the crossing occurs. From the explanation and interpretation provided by Lewis, I'd now like to hand it over to Chris Meehan for technical analysis for compliance.
Madam Chair, managers, I get to do the fun technical stuff, I guess. So what we want to walk through is kind of how does water get to Camp Coldwater Springs? So we're all kind of familiar with how the water gets there, and then really understand how this project interacts with those features associated with water getting to Camp Coldwater Spring, and then understand kind of the findings associated with that. And to Lewis's point, the unknown components of this is understanding what's our contingency plan if unforeseeable issues arise. So with that, I'll turn it over. Hit the next slide there, Tom. So what this slide represents is kind of a cross-section of the geology right next to the project area, and really what I want to call it is the blue arrows. Underneath the project area is a layer of Platteville limestone, and in there is a sliver of soil, what's called a basal magnolia discontinuity. And what it is it's an area or piece of soil that allows water to flow much faster than the areas above it and below it. So it's almost like a nice, I guess, horizontal highway for groundwater to move in this area. And so if you think of it, it's a big sheet of soil that as groundwater infiltrates into the ground, it hits to this area and then starts to move. Go ahead there, manager.
Just look at this picture.
Yep.
Is this meant to be Minnehaha Creek?
Yes.
And this is the Minnesota River down here?
Yep, Mississippi.
Mississippi River?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Just want to clarify that.
Oh, absolutely. So as water comes down, hits this layer, wants to move in this layer, I guess, very fast. The other thing that makes this layer important to point out is that you'll see the Glenwood Shale, it's called an aquitard, so essentially it limits the ability of groundwater to soak down below, so it's a barrier for vertical migration of groundwater. So it keeps the groundwater level abnormally high in this area so that as it kind of buoyants up and hits this layer, it moves towards Camp Coldwater Springs. So this is the first component of how water gets to Camp Coldwater Springs. So if you envision it, big layer soil, groundwater infiltrates and then makes its way over to Camp Coldwater Spring. And so kind of talk about how that interacts. The other component of it is there's vertical, I guess what you could call seams within this area that have generalities on where they're known and how they interact. They go also through the same layer of geology and then intersect with that horizontal layer at Camp Coldwater Springs. So when we're looking at the project, we're looking at how does it interrelate with those two functions, knowing that those are the known sources of how water can get to Camp Coldwater Spring from this project area. And again, I'll preface, this is 1.5 miles away from Camp Coldwater Spring too, so quite a distance away. So I'll hit the next slide there. So just wanted to show a visual representation. I like pictures, and it just helps me understand. So you can see this thin layer showing, and this is along the Mississippi River Valley, that narrow layer in the Platteville that where water tends to seep through. And this is kind of, you can envision it if you go underneath the project area. Water hits this area, it's a nice open area, moves very fast through there. So based on that, I'll go to the next slide, Tom. I want to point out, as Tom mentioned, there's kind of 3 or 4 main components to this project. There's the 2 access shafts and the regulator vault and the tunnel. And what I wanted to highlight is the red line is that basal discontinuity layer. So that layer kind of seeps through. So we could see the access shafts will go through that layer, so they have the potential to intercept the groundwater flow in that area. And then the regulator vault is also very close to that layer as well. So being aware of how those interact with this geological formation is important. The other thing to pick up too is that Glendale Shale, so kind of that layer that limits vertical migration of the groundwater, will also be penetrated penetrated by the access shafts. And so in doing the review of this and working with the applicant and the information that they provided, I'll start with the Glendale Shale. To ensure that water does not begin to migrate down those shafts, they'll be doing grouting around those penetrations to ensure that water doesn't move down past that Glendale and stays within its natural confinement. The other part of the access shafts, given how they're going to be working through that layer in the Platteville, they'll be doing work in the wet, so they won't be doing a lot of dewatering as they work through there. And they're also putting in mitigation measures around the access shafts that will allow groundwater to flow around the different access shafts in these areas. As part of this too, the regulator vault, they'll also be looking to minimize grouting in this area so that's not really blocking that horizontal layer of groundwater flowing towards Camp Coldwater Springs. And again, this is based on, you can see they have the actual soil information up there. This is based on the information that they have, and given that, to Lewis's point, unforeseeable conditions could arise. It's something that in discussions with them, you'll see later we talk about what's a contingency plan associated with ensuring that flows are not impacted on this. So as part of this analysis, the applicant also did a large groundwater model done by Braun Intertech and in fact Kelton Bar over here that modeled how this project interacts with the flows that go to Camp Coldwater Spring and how they would interact during not only just temporary construction activities, but then on a permanent basis. And I can drive into that here in a little bit too. But those are kind of the main features of how it interacts with just that first component of flow getting to Camp Coldwater Spring. So I go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the next pathway of how water gets to Camp Coldwater Springs is these vertical joints or vertical seams that go through the Platteville. Create a seam for water to, I guess, move in a direction towards Camp Coldwater Spring. And these vertical joints move in a northwest to southeast direction. So as they get towards the Mississippi River bluffs, they essentially intersect with that horizontal layer. So you kind of have a couple garden hoses coming together, if you can kind of envision that. And again, these vertical joints are approximate locations. They're not a specific line on a road map, but they're general understandings based on studies that have been done in the area. And so based on these general understandings, we reviewed in precaution to how does the project interact with these vertical joints. And so what I'll do is, Tom, if you can hit the next slide. So as you can see, if you overlay the project on where these vertical seams are known to be, there does appear to be that there would be some interaction associated with these vertical joints. And so the understanding was that was incorporated into the groundwater modeling that the applicant did, and understanding that those seams are there and their approximate locations, but based on their understanding of what they found as their geological setting and then also the modeling, they did not appear to have a significant impact on the flows to Camp Coldwater Spring. So I'll jump to the next slide there, Tom. The next thing I wanted to point out as far as a background as Camp Coldwater Spring is this is just an overview of the monitoring at Camp Coldwater Spring, and the two things I want to take away is just the seasonal variability. So you can see the variation in flow just throughout the year, and it ranges in flows between 10 to 20% throughout the year. So there's just natural variations, and that's due to rain, groundwater, and then just the season. The other thing is you'll notice there's two dips associated in the flows, and these correlate with Highway 55, Trunk Highway 62 construction and temporary dewatering. And the point I want to make is that temporary dewatering did occur, and then as you can see the flows then come back up associated with that. So maybe with that, go to the next slide, Tom. So as part of our review, we absorbed a bunch of our historical data and information, and then also reviewed the plans and construction associated with that. The applicant did an extensive groundwater model looking at how the flows and then how does that model out with Camp Coldwater Spring. Based on the modeling, they didn't anticipate significant changes in the flow, and in fact, it'll probably be hard to detect given how the 10 to 20% variation. Any change within that will be on the order of maybe 3%, so it'll be hard to even just pick up that variation just within the seasonal variation associated with that. And that's really due to, again, you have a big horizontal plane flowing water to it and the distance away from Camp Coldwater Spring. But based on the possibilities of unforeseen conditions that we came up with, we also came up with a contingency plan plan that looks at the district having an on-site observer that'll be familiar with the hydrogeologic conditions at the site to see if there are any unforeseen events we're able to see and monitor, and then work with the applicant to address those, to come up with reasonable solutions to address if there's any flow changes associated with that. We'll also have a monitoring plan associated at Camp Coldwater Spring. They will monitor more frequently. And then we're also working on a response plan. So after this initial review, we had them also do some additional modeling, looking at worst case scenarios, and then a contingency plan details associated with that. So with the next one. So based on that, as I kind of highlighted before, very low potential for any permanent impact to Camp Coldwater Spring, knowing that there are unforeseeable conditions that could occur out there. As part of the contingency plan, we determined that, well, let's make sure we have eyes and ears so that if there is something, we can make an adjustment at that point in time. But again, based on the information they gave us, it'll be really hard to pick up between the natural variations and seasonality at the actual spring. So again, we understand that it's extremely unlikely, but it's something that we'll be on the site monitoring as we have in the past. So that's the findings.
Okay, questions at this point? Manager Shackleton?
In a worst case scenario, how long would a plume take to affect, how long would anything take to affect Camp Coldwater?
It would be, and I'll defer to Kelton on this, but it'd probably take 6 months to maybe a year and a half to really see that change in flow. And maybe Kelton.
If the main joint is affected,
Mhm.
that can it's pretty much a short circuit, so it could be within a week or two.
Okay.
And how do we know a worst case scenario had been achieved? Would that be in a week or two, or would it be something we could determine right away?
You would probably, given to Kelton's point, you would pick up on it right away. There would just be a gush of water that would be inordinate amount of water that would come in.
Manager Blixt?
I was gonna say, I remember when the construction happened 55 and somebody hit it at 50th Street, it was like a geyser. I mean, it was like water everywhere.
Okay.
All right, go on.
Uh,
I'm sorry, one moment. Manager Cleve?
You mentioned, when you put the shaft in, it would make a vertical penetration through the chip. Is that something that, will be patched in a way? For 55, there was a membrane put
Yep.
there, so
Yep.
what will happen?
Yeah, so they'll grout around those access shafts, so it seals it kind of like a stopper in a tub almost.
Go ahead, Mr. Dietrich.
I actually have a question.
Don't go ahead, Mr. Dietrich. Manager Blixt?
And I'm not sure if my question is for Louis or you guys, but I'm just wondering, because the law mentions the Minnesota Historical Sites Act and the Minnesota Field Archaeology Act, and how is the review done? What is the review done under those? And how does that take place?
Mr. Smith?
Madam Chair and Manager Blix, that reference really is a procedural reference that does not apply to the district. We're conducting this review based on that substantive standard of will this activity present a risk that it may diminish the flow of the springs. That reference to the Historic Site Act and the Archaeological Act is a reference to a process that the State Historic Preservation Office and other state officials go through for reviewing this project. I'm not aware of what process they've used for this project. So we're going through our review using these standards.
So the Met Council would be the ones to submit to the SHPO?
Correct.
To do that then? Okay, thank you.
Last slide here. So just kind of want to go over, again, the unforeseen conditions. The district will have a construction observer so that if the geyser does occur, we can see it and then work with the applicant on coming up with reasonable solutions. Again, the big areas are the access shafts and the regulator vault, and then just some unforeseen geological condition. As part of it, also monitoring, so that's our eyes and ears on the ground too at the spring, so we can kind of see if there's any dramatic changes there as well. And then the Met Council will also work collaboratively with the district if we do see some unforeseeable conditions, then come up with the remediation plan as far as addressing any kind of flow concerns.
Madam Chair, managers, then in summary, the risk of impact to spring flow is low, and this is based on the best available data and knowledge. And to address the minimal risk that is present, to mitigate for this risk, the district, along with consultants, have crafted a variety of conditions that will draft conditions for the permit, for the issuance of the permit, and then the performance of the work. And these revolve around the contingency plans that we just talked about, the monitoring of spring flow, and the submission of reports to the district, building to specification, and finally the construction monitoring while in the plat bill.
Thank you. Before I open for questions, do managers have any questions? Manager Calkins.
I have a couple. I guess my greatest concern lies with where this is going to intercept a potential fault and the fact that we aren't exactly sure where they are. Because Manager Blixt, I think we were the only two who were on the board at that time, is right. At least from my perspective, it was kind of scary when they dug that hole and the water was really just pouring in there. So maybe Kelton would be the one to address that, but that's one question is, do you have some, what is your reassurance that that's not going to be an issue? The second part of it is I understand that if you do hit one of those, the flow at the spring is likely to be affected rather quickly. You mentioned a mitigation plan. Doesn't sound like that's been created, is that correct?
Well, I would, Manager Calkins, to speak to that, they're putting mitigation measures in place as far as just around where the potential is for the access shafts. But given the unknown nature of what could possibly be encountered, at that point in time, we would look to develop what the course correction is, given how we would be planning for essentially the unknown at this point.
Okay, because I would be interested in knowing if you hit a major fault, how do you mitigate that? And then, I guess it would be a related question, is that the slower flow, the indication is that it's going to take up to 6 months to notice that, so you're not going to catch that during the construction at all. How do you mitigate that if there's damage, especially since you may not even know generally where it occurred, but you don't know the specifics about it. So I guess all of those questions revolve around if a problem does occur. How do you mitigate that?
How you would look to mitigate it is, on a big picture scale, is figuring out where the groundwater is moving or has gone to, that you're not picking it up at the spring, and look to get it redirected on that. So that would be identifying different ways to manage or monitor flow in that area, to identify if you do hit it and there is an impact. You would look to identify those and put in place to get that flow back into whatever layer it was, whether it's a vertical seam or a horizontal seam, to get it down to the springs. Knowing that it's not, you stick a pipe in it, you would have to come up with a more elaborate solution than just stick a pipe in a concept.
Because we're dealing with a fairly complicated system that we really don't know that much about.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to, if possible, know a little bit more about what the details of what mitigation might be. And then going back to the grout question, this is a system that's going to be in place for many, many, many years. Is there a history with the materials that are used for grouting as far as knowing how they're going to hold up and for how long, under conditions such as the conditions that we would have here?
Our understanding is the grouting is a very reliable approach to dealing with these types of issues, especially with the confining layer and then also around the actual access shafts. And I can always defer to Doug and Kelton on the techniques associated with that. But then to kind of your first question, as far as identifying kind of the mitigation measures that would pop up associated with this, and understanding that we would love to know everything more, but given how we have to actually unearth a lot of these situations, we're trying to understand, based on what we do know, working within those confines, to come up with a solution that would, as best of our ability, address any kind of flow concerns that would come out. But I'll turn it over to you guys if you guys have comments on that.
And if you do, perhaps you would come to the mic and state your name.
I'm Kelvin Barr, consultant for the Metro Council. Good question about the location of the joint. We've looked over the existing information that was pulled together about year 2000. And it does look as though the joint is close but not into the footprint of the regular building. But just to make sure, within the next week or so, we're going to be doing a ground penetrating radar survey of the site, which would be, if it works well, it should be a very good diagnostic tool to locate where the joints are within that footprint. And so we'd have a much better idea at that time if we would expect to run into a major joints that would be running a lot of water. And it also would give us time, if we do find it, to talk about mitigating measures.
And do you think mitigation is indeed possible?
I think we have a couple different ways that we could comprehensively plug the joint and totally reversibly unplug it after the project is done. So I'm pretty confident in that myself.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Manager Blixt.
I'm just wondering, because the ground penetrating radar is what we used earlier, when we tried to figure this out in a different area, and having that information was really valuable, and I would hope that we could get access to that data from them so that in the event that the Dairy Queen decides to build a tunnel or something, you know, that we have the information to use in the future.
I think it can be trying to get to the Dairy Queen.
Mr. Panzer.
Madam Chair and Managers, I'd just like to elaborate on Manager Culkin's question about the grout. The integrity of the grouting.
Could we have you use a microphone, Mr. Panzer?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The integrity of the grouting is more important in the short term because it controls the flow of water into the work area. And once the structures are built, they're built to be waterproof, basically. So the movement of water will just be around them. So if 30, 40 years from now, if the grout would disintegrate or, not be as good as it was, it really doesn't matter. It's more for controlling the movement of water during construction so you can minimize dewatering. And anyway, so it's more important on the short term than it is the long term.
Manager
Could
Culkin?
you just clarify that? My understanding was the grouting was primarily to prevent water from flowing vertically along the sides of the pipe through the confining layer rather than horizontally. Is that correct?
It's kind of both, really. I mean, it could be either one. If we're pretty sure we have this horizontal discontinuity that seems to be continuous in the area. We don't know about the joint, but I mean, the grouting activity could take place in both structures. Is that what you were asking? It could be in the vertical joint or the horizontal.
My question primarily was that if the grout failed, it could fail in both directions. But if the grout failed in the vertical direction, then we lose that water because it goes right down through the
Oh, no, I don't think there's much chance of that because there's several layers of aquitard type shale that, there's layer after layer of that, so I'm not too worried about that.
Any other questions? Manager Shepherd.
Mr. Barr, can you expound upon kind of a worst-case scenario. You described how if everything were to go really bad, you could just plug it. Just help me think through how that would work.
If there was a joint that actually intersected the building footprint, and you would have to be excavating into that, that would be where you would have a chance for having hundreds of gallons a minute flooding into the excavation. That would be when, to dewater the project excavation, you could be having a culpable impact on the spring for that time. But something that, a concept that can be used is if we can locate where the joints are, we can both upstream and downstream of the location, we can be drilling a fairly large diameter boring, intersecting the joint, and then inflate within that boring a liner so that it's basically pressed against the entire wall of the boring and goes from the Glenwood up to the top of the plateau. That should be a hydraulic block for flow on both sides, so that for the time of construction, you're blocking the joint. You would be having an effect on the spring, but it is likely to be minor as was described. And once the excavation construction is done, you can take the water out of that liner, pull the liner out, fill it with gravel, and so you're basically unplugging that joint and letting it basically continue on. The excavation will be down a third of the way into the plat fill, so there's another 2/3 of the plat fill for that joint to be existing and flowing under the building. So that's one concept, and we might have other things that we're thinking of that could do the same, have the same intent, but I think we're trying to make sure that we can be keeping the joint viable after construction, and but during construction, get rid of the water so we can construct it as quickly as possible.
Do you have a sense for the pressure of the water in the joint? I mean, and also kind of the size of the joint, just.
Well, the joint should be a matter of a few inches at most. There may be a series of them, but if you saw 2 lines in that figure, dashed line and a solid line, probably there's a series of joints within that that together are transporting the water. So we're probably on the outside of that field of joints. So it's possible, but it seems like a small possibility right now that we actually have one running through the footprint of the building. But this would be a way that we could be taking care of it.
And so, I mean, if there are a series of kind of parallel joints and you plug one in essence, the pressure buildup and the water backup would presumably shift the water to other joints, and so it's not as if there would just be a dam behind which water is building up. It would instead go to the flow around.
We have what they call an echelon series of these parallel joints. So you probably would be diverting flow into these other joints off to the east. So, and in that case, I mean, worst case would be to have a decrease in the spring, but very likely you would be just having it shifting over and not really seeing any effect in the spring.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. We can open. Is there any member of the public here who wishes? I'm sorry? Yes. Is there any member of the public here who wishes to make a verbal presentation to the board? May I see a show of hands? Okay. What I'm going to ask in each case is that you come to the microphone and give us your name and address as you begin, and then we will allow you 3 minutes each to speak, and I'll ask Mr. Smith to watch the time for us. Then you can always submit additional written information in the methods that Mr. Dietrich outlined. We have comment cards, or you can submit them in writing in any way that, in fashion that you wish for 1 week. So please come to the microphone, give us your name and address, and begin.
Madam Chair,
Manager Olson?
is that microphone? I'm not hearing it.
Well, we should find out
Nobody
if
can
those
hear
in
in
the
the
back
back.
of the room could hear Kelton.
Nobody can hear. That's my concern.
You hit the end of it, you know,
Yeah.
That's real fantastic.
We can
Well,
always,
we do have
Can you use one of these too?
Okay,
an alternate
have them sit
microphone.
at the desk then.
Who would wish to speak? Sir, could you take this microphone and sit at the table?
Table?
I know that one works, yes.
Sure. All right, my name is Tom Holtzleiter. I live at 10630 Queen Circle in Bloomington. I've been working on cold water for about 15 years, so I'm pretty familiar with this. But one of the things I wanted to bring up is why no one has ever does a dye test. They're very cheap, they're easy, and they tell you a whole lot of information. The big thing that happened at the 5562 interchange when they finally did a dye test is that it showed it took 16 days to go from the interchange to the spring, which showed a connection, but it also showed that the interchange was not a source water of the spring as much as it was a pressure head. And when they built that interchange and dropped it down lower than the level of the spring, it would have been an effective drain. Most of the water would have to come from the north. The breach at the 50th Street, as Kelton and everyone's brought up, was flowing at 200 to 500 gallons per minute, if I recall right, which is well above what cold water flows at. It's also, if you go down there, at a slight hill, and the creek is below that, and so you have a lot of water coming from that area. This project being north of that area, again, it comes into how much is this a source of the water and how much of this is acting as a pressure head for what is actually flowing to the spring. So if you put a dye test at the 50th Street and you put it at the project area, it would reveal an immense amount of information of how this interconnection is going. It would answer the question of, if they did breach at the tunnel area, would this really affect anything or not? Or is it effectively separating more along that 50th Street line? The other thing I wanted to bring up is that a lot of this is hinging upon the monitoring by the National Park Service at Coldwater Spring. And what they monitor is what comes out of the spring house. If you ever go down there and put your hand over that pipe, you will see there's all kinds of water that flows into that reservoir that does not go through the spring house. And so what's being monitored is a section of that spring for a section of time. How many seconds does it take to fill a 5-gallon bucket? And so it's a very small percentage of that spring compared to what was really done. When MnDOT monitored it for a couple of years, they're the only ones that have ever really monitored that spring. And since what's done by the Park Service, it's going to give you an indication of a generality, but is nowhere near to the degree to tell whether this project is going to do anything one way or the other. And the third thing I wanted to bring up is in the packet that you had out there with the MnDOT proposal. They put in there Zone 3 that it is an area just north of Coldwater Spring as an area of low impact. And it goes right over where this main fracture is, and that really needs to be corrected as one of the most potentially hazardous areas. And incidentally, when they were building that road, I have a picture of it, when they dug about 15 feet deep right next to that fracture line, and there's no water at all, which shows that that fracture really is carrying the majority of the water, and there's areas that are very close that have no sensitivity whatsoever. And that, again, brings back to the dye test, is that is really going to be a way to find out, some of the answers that people are asking.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzleiter.
Madam President, I'd like to defer to Kelton Barr in reference to the dye testing.
Well, a process question. Are we going to collect all of the comments and respond on the 12th? or did you wish to respond individually to them now?
If there's questions available to be answered here tonight, I'd prefer to do that and then have the rest of the questions be collected and answered collectively.
Let me finish taking the comments.
Sure.
And then come back to you. Who is the next person who wishes to address this matter?
My name is Sue Ann Martinson, and I live at 2900 11th Avenue South in Minneapolis. I have a handout. I am not going to read the whole thing, clearly, but there are some comments I would like to make. Tonight there's been a lot of technical information, and as an English major, my background is very different with a master's degree, and mine is in English. And I understand the necessity for the technical information, and I also find it very helpful, and what I can understand of it. And so, but I just want to say I'm taking a somewhat different look at this. The article I'm passing out is called "Not Ours to Exploit." It's by Terry Tempest Williams. She refers to a man. Oh, I also want to say with the technical information that sometimes we look at all those details and we forget to step back and take an overview. And that's what I'm trying to say here a little bit tonight, is an overview in regard not only to Coldwater, but to other both local and national projects. There is a man called Gregory Bateson who wrote a book called Steps to an Ecology of the Mind. We live in a world that is made of relationships. He talks about the pattern that connects, and he talks about the fact that the division of things into parts is a convenience. And when you're doing things technically, often you put them into parts because it is a convenience and it helps people understand, including me. But also, I think that, well, he says, what is the pattern that connects? It's on the back page. It was never meant to be answered because the pattern's constantly changing. The pathology of wrong thinking doesn't take into consideration relationships. This pathology has never been more apparent in American politics. And the reference here is to Rick Santorum, and these comments were made in 2012. So this is an older article, so I just want to say that it's not current. Consider Rick Santorum's recent comments to Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation, when he said Barack Obama's worldview is different from that of most Americans. Oops, he said different than, but it's different from. The day before, Santorum had said that the president believes in some phony ideal, phony theology, a theology not based on the Bible, a different theology, which is very confusing. But when he asked him to clarify, he said that he wasn't referring to the president's faith, but to environmentalism. He was talking about radical environmentalists, and the idea that man is here to serve the earth as opposed to husband its resources and be good stewards of the earth.
Excuse me, Ms. Martinson?
Yeah.
We have you at 3 minutes. Would you like to wrap up your comments for us?
Yes, I'm almost through.
Good.
With this part. Santorum said man is the objective, and radical environmentalists have it upside down. However, Bateson would say that radical environmentalists have it right side up. It has nothing to do with religion. The epistemology is part of biology. And finally, he concludes, I am right. The whole of our thinking about what we are and what other people are has got to be restructured. The most important task today is perhaps to learn the new way. And of course, there is the recent book by Naomi Klein called This Changes Everything. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend it. It has lots of technical information in it as well as other kinds of information. Thank you.
Is there another person who wishes to comment?
President, Board, thank you. Susu Jeffrey for Friends of Coldwater. The language of the law is very, very specific, and I hear the language in the proposal is really slippery. It's filled with ifs and coulds and mays, and that's problematic. Coldwater is an acknowledged Dakota tribal sacred site and, perhaps more importantly, a traditional cultural property. What happens to Dakota and other Native people who come to the spring to gather water, to pray? What happens when the water is lessened step by step? Let's see. Mike Panzer in February of '05 said there's an appearance of gradual downward trend in the flow over the past 6 or 7 years. So I see that continuing. Every cut bleeds water. I would like to know how much dewatering is going to happen in the limestone and in the sandstone, and what effect that has on the black ash seeps, those very rare seeps. And I think that's Park Board land, Minneapolis Park Board. I'm not sure if they've been notified. But back to the law with its specific action of no action that may diminish the flow of the water to or from Coldwater Springs. It doesn't say temporary. It doesn't say permanent. It says no. And I find that problematic when people acting as government willingly are willing to break the law. I'm concerned with all this grouting of this 44-foot by 60-foot vault. And I remember asking Kelton when they said to us before, well, the water's just going to go around. It's just going to go around. So I said to Kelton, what happens when the water hits? I said, it can't go left or right or down because that space is already taken up with water and rocks and earth. So that's a problem. With the grouting up of the vault, the horizontal 5-foot sewer, the sewer that we don't know very much about, which is being replaced. Not much is known about the condition of this tunnel, is your quote. So what happens to all that space where the vertical shafts and the vault and the new tunnel? What happens to all that space where water used to flow? I mean, do we lose it? What happens? Are we just going to dry out the land? When I hear we're confident about restoring, I really think that this is very slippery language. Can it be done? Oh, sure, you can make it dry, anything. But is it worth it? This is the last major natural spring in Hennepin County. It's a sacred site. It's a traditional cultural property. In the 70s, it was used as an emergency drinking water supply for South Minneapolis. We have an affidavit about that.
Excuse me, Ms. Jeffrey. You've reached the end of your 3 minutes. Can you wrap up your comments?
Yes, ma'am. Back to the language of the law. It doesn't say that temporary diminishment of flow is legal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment at this time? I see no hands. Mr. Dietrich, did you want to respond?
Madam President, in respect to time and knowing that you have a full agenda still to cover, I think the best course of action would be to respond to all of these comments in writing and address them at the next board meeting.
Thank you. Manager Shackleton?
I guess I have a question for, I guess, Mr. Barwins.
All right. Then I will close the public hearing at this time. Manager Blixt?
I was just going to say I have a question too.
Then Manager Shackleton?
So obviously, the proposal here is to replace the sanitary sewer, correct? How close to failure are we with the existing one, given that it's 80 some odd years old?
Hello, Madam President and managers. My name is Doug Henriksen. I'm with Brown and Caldwell Engineers. I'm the project manager on this project. The existing interceptor that we're replacing is about, like you said, about 1,000 feet. It was built in the 1930s when the Metropolitan Sewage Plant was being built over in St. Paul, and the plan was to take, before that, all the sewage was going right into the river. At that time, they made the decision to start bringing sanitary flows over to the treatment plant to be installed. So that in the 30s, there was a lot of big interceptors that were being built across the Minneapolis and St. Paul. This particular reach is very steep, and it's very narrow, and it's very difficult for the Metropolitan Council operations staff to get inside of it just because of its configuration. They've done some testing and some CCTV inspection of it, but they've determined that it is approaching a failure point. It's not at a point where it's going to fail tomorrow, but it could, in the next few years, something could happen, and this is carrying, sewage, wastewater. And so the decision has been made. We looked at several alternatives, looking at slip lining it or putting another pipe inside the pipe. The problem with that is it would be a massive disruption to the grounds above. We'd have to put in major lines temporarily to reroute the existing sewage flow that's running through the pipe. And so the decision was made that it's best for, from a cost-effective standpoint as well as a public disruption standpoint to put in a new tunnel for 1,000 feet. And so that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing. Now, on the regulator, the reason for that, as Tom and Chris had mentioned, there's some new regulatory requirements that are coming down from the EPA. They have to get rid of this it's a kind of a passive wall that's inside the interceptor right now that kind of regulates stormwater flows and sanitary flows, and they're making them put in an actual gate that'll be monitored down at the regional facility for Met Council, and somebody will actually be responsible for pushing a button if the flows become high enough that it's going to be a problem with their pipe.
Manager Blixt?
My question, I'm not sure who can answer it, but really is to something that one of the commenters made me wonder about I&I and whether or not that there is actually already in the current pipe a significant amount of the flow probably maybe being already siphoned off because of the age of the pipe and the likelihood that it's got a significant amount of cracks in it. So I'm just wondering, can you address whether or not that's likely, or whether you even know whether that's occurring?
Yes, I can't say that I&I is a problem. Met Council has been monitoring this site for quite a while. There has been no overflows at this site in over 10 years. They have records for that, but they've come close a couple times. Last year, when this particular area actually flooded, they came very close to going over. Met Council is putting in programs across the 7-county area where they're trying to reduce I&I throughout the whole system.
Would you spell out for everyone what I&I means?
I&I is infiltration and inflow, and what that means is water that's getting into the pipe system, and it's coming in through, a lot of times the pipe is down in groundwater, and there's groundwater getting in through cracks in the pipe or sometimes there's illegal connections. Some people connect their leaders from their house, from the gutters down into the sewers that end up going down into the interceptor system. And I should say that Met Council really just maintains the large interceptor systems. It's the various cities that also have the collection systems, and a lot of the I&I problems really reside at the city level.
Thank you.
I just want to say that what I was wondering about is that is it possible that some of the spring water may be entering your system already, and that by providing a new pipe that's now going to be fully sealed, that you may be actually improving the situation. I'm asking the question, is that possible?
Yes, that is a possibility, and the new tunnel that we're putting in it'll be much more durable than what's there now.
Okay, thank you.
Manager Olson?
One last question. Can you go through the impact on the spring if the current 1938 system were to catastrophically fail? Let's say we were waiting 2 years and all of a sudden it collapses. What would happen to the spring?
Maybe I should refer to Kelton. Do you want to talk about that, or?
It would mainly be.
I'm sorry, but Mr. Barr, could you come to the microphone? Thank you.
I'm actually probably not the best person to ask about this. The spring would be affected only if water is getting into the system from the Platteville directly, and maybe indirectly from the joint. If it's St. Peter water or the creek water, those are different matters. So it would really just be the Platteville.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
What do they do with existing pipe that's going to be abandoned? How do they fill it or cap it or what?
Yes, the plan is once the new pipe and regulator is installed and we've got sewage going through the new facilities, that the old system will be grouted in place so that nothing can get into it and it won't collapse in the future.
So they fill the whole 1,000 feet or whatever
Yes.
it is?
Yes.
Other questions, managers? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Manager Coulter?
If I remember correctly, the dates that were in the permit was supposed to be done the end of December, is that right?
Manager Calkins, construction isn't slated to begin until...
I know it hasn't, but my real question is when does this start, this project?
It's supposed to begin in June of 2015.
Okay, and so based on information, Kelton mentioned they're going to do ground penetrating radar. If you determine that the fault is more likely to be affected than you currently believe, is there an intent then to modify the plan? Can the plan be modified?
Yes, if the GPR analysis shows that there is a joint that is problematic, it will probably delay the design and the bidding of the project.
Okay, and because the information would be helpful in that regard as well, the question was brought up about dye testing. Is there a potential that would be of benefit as far as planning for this project?
I'm not sure how it would benefit Metropolitan Council. I know this is an important issue for the watershed district. I'm a little out of my element. It would seem that we'd first need to find out where the joint is before we could even do the dye testing. Maybe Kelton, you want to talk about that?
I would agree with Doug. The first thing is you would need to have a question that you want to have answered, that a dye trace test would very likely give you that answer. If you have that kind of question, then you need to find the joint, and you need to be able to add a dye and a few thousand gallons of water to that location. So there's a bit of setup to have it happen, and then you have to be setting up monitoring locations, the spring, and there's probably a few other places as well. And then it would take at least a month, but it would more likely take several months.
So based on the information gathering that you're doing now, is that something that might be a recommendation if it appears that there would be a benefit in doing that?
Again, it's a question that you need, that is trying to be answered.
to do the dye trace would be able to tell you the water that we're tagging right now with this dye is showing up at these locations. And if that's the kind of question that you want to be answering, then a dye trace would be beneficial.
I'm asking the question not as the expert, I'm asking the question of the experts, is what their recommendation would be, and our ultimate goal is to protect the flow of the spring. So that's the question. And so the question is that during this process, I would like to hear something that comes back that says whether or not this would provide valuable information in protecting the spring. And I know that it's not an easy thing, that it's a very complicated thing because we don't understand what the flow regime
Yes.
of the water is. But it's something that I would like to hear something more about. And I guess I would tag on to that when it comes back for the permit, we're talking about a three-dimensional system here of water flow and the project itself. And I think it would be helpful for people to better understand, really what are the three-dimensional relationships between the project and the flow of the water. We've had a little bit of that tonight, but it's not really a three-dimensional analysis. And as well as that, I have to come back to the whole mitigation question, which would tie into that, is what, if something happens here, how are you going to mitigate that? Because I keep coming back to the question, once you damage one of these things, to me, because it is a complicated system, it's pretty hard to fix it. So better that we avoid having that happen in the first place than have that happen to the best degree that we can.
Dye trace test will likely show us that the plumbing system has more complications than we knew. So, we can be addressing that in the question, in the answering that we'll be preparing for staff.
Manager Miller?
Are we done with the public hearing?
Yes, I've closed the public hearing.
Anybody else got a question?
Manager Brooks, go ahead.
I'm just wondering will we have the results from the ground penetrating radar prior to our making a decision?
What's the question?
Will we know the results, have the report on the ground penetrating radar prior to our making our decision?
Yes, I believe so. The plan is for Kelton or Bronner Tech to go out next week and do the field survey, and then once that's done, they probably need a week or two to complete their report, and we should have that information before the February 12th meeting.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Final question, Manager Miller?
Not a question, just a kind of an observation. I have no idea how the sewage from my house in Edina gets to South St. Paul, but for Pig's Eye, but it more than likely crosses the river someplace. And number one, I want to make sure that as a consumer, I'm not stuck with not having a conveyance of sanitary sewage from my house. Number one. Number two, it seems to me that this is solving a major potential environmental problem with polluting the river, Mississippi River, with sanitary sewage if a big event occurs. So, as a consumer of sanitary sewage services provided by the Metro Council, I'm really interested that they address all these issues about the impact on Coldwater Springs, but more importantly, I want to make sure that we have a safe and permanent conveyance of the sewage to the treatment facility. So I think we should get all these answers we should get, but keep in mind the important service that's being provided to all of us, and make sure that anything that can be mitigated is mitigated, but that we not be a blockage in this improvement. I find it really strange that the legislature would dictate a law was so specific on one particular one particular environmental asset and let farm animals run into creeks and rivers and streams and lakes all over the state. It seems to me just to be a misplaced priority. I'm just wondering, whoever thought of this law and what impacts do they think it was going to eventually have in the long term on we got a built environment here. And this has been in place for 85 years, and Lord knows where, well, we do know where the sewage was going before it was put into place. So it's just kind of a general concern I have to make sure that we get all the answers, but we don't be an unnecessary roadblock.
And my understanding is that this is before us because of the state law, that it otherwise is in compliance with our rules. So we'll make sure that we follow through with that. Thank you very much, everyone, for your comments and questions. Thank you for the experts for being here this evening. Staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just a brief item before we get to 12.2. I'd ask to have the January 15th minutes removed from the consent agenda for 2 items. There's a misspelling of a name, a small typo in the list of CAC members, Steve Moan, and then I'd like just a little bit of additional information added under the administrator's report. Bear with me, I'm going to find the line. Well, it's the last paragraph anyway. There's a mention of setting up a terminal and demonstration, and that should say that there will be an iPad set up with a Laserfiche application added to demonstrate accessing the online board packets. Just a little bit more information about what that demonstration is about. And I would move approval of the minutes with those 2 changes.
Second.
Discussion or question? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution 15-005. Ms. Clark, authorization to award the bid for Cottingville Park.
Chair White, managers, the bid process for the Cottageville Park design was recently completed using the best value contract procurement method, which takes into account not only bid price, but things like contractor experience. And that process was outlined in your packet. If you please recall, the project was originally bid in July, where we received 2 bids. The low bid was $1.8 million, about 30% higher than the engineer's estimate, therefore bids were rejected. The board authorized a redesign which included a value engineering process to look at cost-saving measures, and also we expanded the scope of the project to include additional lands such as the alleyway on the north side of the project. The bid process this time resulted in 5 bids, with the low bid being approximately $1.68 million, below our original bid of $1.8 with the newer engineer's estimate of $2.1 million. So I think that the bids came in favorably, and I also wanted to point out we used a design team approach for this project. The team included Manager Calkins. The project greatly benefited by the technical expertise that Manager Calkins provided, and also the practical and functional design advice from Ann Boyd, who's here tonight, and the Blake Road Corridor Collaborative on the community garden, which is, because of their participation, is very functionally integrated into the park design. So the team greatly appreciates those pieces of advice. The bid process, again, resulted in 5 bids. The process was detailed in your board packet. The low bid was from Custom Builders. The low adjusted score on which the recommendation to our board is made is also Custom Builders. Staff met with the Custom Builders design team to talk about their design approach to the project, and found that their approach and process for the project is well thought out, and they appear well prepared to deliver an excellent park design. Staff recommends board approval of Resolution 15005. And in summary, recommends awarding the contract, including bid alternates 1, 2, and 3 to Custom Builders for the contract amount of $1.689303 million. Request to establish a not-to-exceed construction budget of $1.858233 million. And request authorization of construction oversight contracts to Wank Associates for $37,450 and Hart Howerton for the amount of $40,000.
Thank you. Managers, Manager Miller?
With the bid and the oversight contracts, where are we compared to the original budget?
The original, the budget question's difficult because the city is ultimately managing the available funds and the budget. The original bid, the project estimate was 1.3 million. The low bid was 1.8. The project was expanded in scope.
All right.
But the low bid was lower than the original low bid, if that helps.
Great, thank you. I move approval.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 15-009. Ms. Christopher?
Is it realistic to look at this drawing and have a hope that it'll turn out anywhere near as attractive?
Manager Miller,
Question.
managers, we used a team approach to design. We have technical experts on our staff. We had a design team of 2 consultants with specialized expertise in engineering and landscape architecture. We're using that same team to implement construction based on that team approach and the confidence that the contractor has demonstrated so far with their past experience. Staff intends to deliver a project prettier than the picture.
The Calhoun Ponds and the Grays Bay Dam both turned out, I think, as they were depicted originally. But we've got other examples of the projects that didn't, and I just hope that we have the same success on this one.
Manager Shackleton?
And couldn't we blame one of our fellow managers if some of the plantings are chosen incorrectly?
Yeah, if they fail.
No, because I expressed some opinions that were not accepted.
But you were managing as a manager should.
Why in the rendering are the trees on the north end dying already? These are all green.
Those are flowering plants.
That's a case of warranty work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 15-009. Ms.
Who did the work on the trails, that Heritage 20?
Blackstone Contractors, who are the second.
Second one.
Madam Chair, managers, at the workshop earlier this month, staff provided an update regarding the previously ordered fish bypass channel project and discussed that due to the fact that the wave, the standing wave that previously formed at 54th Street is no longer forming, that staff was revisiting the idea of removing the grade control structure and doing more of a full-scale restoration through Arden Park. Benefits of going this route would be that in addition to providing fish passage, there'd be also opportunity for improving habitat upstream, restoring more natural ecological function of the stream, as well as incorporating some whitewater recreation features, improving safety by eliminating the need for the portage and also providing less treacherous whitewater features, and then also potentially incorporating some of the park improvements that were requested by the community through the city's public engagement process, such as controlling buckthorn and planning for some opportunities for creek access and better view sheds. As indicated at the workshop, staff has met with members of the Rapids Riders Paddling Group, and they are supportive of the district going this direction. And since then, I've also reached out to a few others, in particular, one gentleman who came to the previous meetings and had concerns about the bypass channel option. And he has also expressed support and is excited about some of the habitat improvements that might be possible. What was just passed out is a letter from the city indicating that they understand we are considering going a different direction and that they are supportive and willing to work with us on that. And as indicated at the workshop, the city is looking for a decision from the district as to whether or not to incorporate the culvert into their road reconstruction. And since we do have some good indications of support from the community, staff's recommendation is that we do not implement the bypass channel, but rather pursue the larger restoration plan. I'll take any questions.
Manager Blips.
So, as I understand what you're presenting is that basically we'll remove that concrete kind of slab-like thing, and we will design something that will reintroduce the wave of some sort, but it will also be more fish-friendly. Thank you. Is that, in essence, what you're proposing?
Yes, Manager Blick's managers, and just from preliminary conversations with a whitewater design firm, it's possible we might be able to provide actually 2 or 3 features. I don't think you actually need as big of a drop as we have there to create a wave, so there could be, a 1 to 2 foot drop instead, and it would be designed in a way that the fish can get around it.
Okay, great.
There was a presentation at the, is it called the one that's in September at the Arboretum Clean Water Summit? Anyway, from a town in Iowa that had introduced baffles in the stream through their town so that they could have some white water. Very popular. It was an interesting presentation. Any questions or comments? Motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Resolution 15-010. Mr. Hayman.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Managers. Before you is Resolution 15010 for action this evening. Authorization to complete additional investigation of presumed asbestos-containing materials at the 325 Blake Road property. Just a brief history of it. In March 2014, the district entered into an agreement with Wank Associates for demolition planning. Throughout 2014, those planning activities included a variety of investigations such as on-site inventories, decommissioning a refrigeration system, existing utilities, hazmat survey, things of that nature. Due to the present tenant operations, we had to conduct the initial hazmat survey in a way that didn't disrupt operations and could not access areas that were restricted or locked based on the activities that they currently have on site, and also conducted in what would be considered a non-destructive manner so as not to impact the structure itself where we may have warranties such as roofing materials and things of that nature. In the areas that we were able to survey through the hazmat, we discovered asbestos-containing materials a bit more broadly than previously anticipated. And so in order to further define the presence, quantity, location, and nature of that asbestos to better inform us about disposal and remediation, we're recommending an amendment to the current contract in an amount not to exceed $12,365. The more thorough investigation would assist in doing exactly what I just mentioned, in that we can refine the disposal process, refine the costs associated with total demolition, as well as assist staff in seeking grant funding for that remediation of those contaminants. Lastly, to mention that we do have operations that are currently taking place on the site, so we'll conduct all additional investigation, and some of it has to be in a more what would be considered destructive manner. We would do so in coordination with our current business management firm as well as the tenants that are on site.
Thank you. Managers, questions?
Move approval. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Heaney.
Thank you.
You can seek state and county funds for remediation of the...
Yes, we're currently coordinating meetings with both to investigate, and the information we find through this process will greatly assist with that. So. And one last point, we will be back in front of the board then, I anticipate likely March, before we would have this final investigation complete. We'll have the draft report for the board to view.
Resolution 15-011, Mr. Whisker.
Madam Chair, Manager's Resolution 15-011 is to authorize the execution of a memorandum of understanding between the district and Stonegate Farm Incorporated and Property Resource Development Corporation. The memorandum of understanding is modeled after some of our other recent partnerships and the framework that positions the district to collaborate in upfront development, basically aligning the interests between the landowner's economic goals, local communities, and the district's conservation and natural resource goals. Most recent example would be the Mater, the wetland bank with the city of Minnetrista, which we hope is coming back before you sometime soon and had a productive outcome, resulting in a conservation subdivision plan. The proposed MOU with Stonegate Farm and Property Resource Development Corporation really is all about involving the district in a conservation area planning effort. So within the subdivision, there's going to be a required conservation area. The reason for that is there's been some past litigation, and Stonegate Farm and the city of Medina, where the property is located, have reached a contingent settlement agreement. And the contingent settlement agreement requires that a conservation plan be put together for the development and that there be a land stewardship plan for that land. The land, and there's a map in your packet, that is owned by Stonegate Farms includes about 171 acres of land that is located in proximity to Three Rivers Park District's Baker Park. It's also in proximity to Wolfswood Woods State Natural Area, and it is in a high priority or key conservation area for the district. It's located next to land that we've looked at in the past, so it's of interest to the district. As part of the arrangement with the city, there's consideration for 42 single-family homes on the site, and then the conservation area is basically wetlands, their associated wetland buffers, steep slopes, and then a minimum of 30% of the buildable land area. And so that represents the potential for about 90 acres out of the 170. And so there's opportunities for a greenway or corridor connectivity to key natural resources off the site, as well as restoring resources on the site. The Memorandum of Understanding proposes the following areas of collaboration. The first, whenever we enter an arrangement like this, is ensuring that we clearly articulate and retain, obviously, our regulatory authority, but we do it in a proactive way. So we'll be providing some rules analysis and guidance as the process develops. We'll also be facilitating the process of developing a development plan to achieve the conservation goals of the district and the conservation goals established through this contingent settlement agreement, as well as the economic goals of the landowner, obviously, while meeting the rules and coordinating with all these other agencies. So really it's about Stonegate Farm and the district collaborating to assess the conservation value within this property, identifying opportunities for enhancement, connectivity off-site, and then another piece is once we've identified what's possible, assisting in the identification of funds, not necessarily our funds, but we have a recent partnership with Great River Greening, and those would be the kind of things that we'd be looking to connect the landowner and the city to. Any future roles regarding the district's involvement in the land or funding or any decisions like that would be the subject of a formal contract or cooperative agreement and would be brought back before the board. The last thing I'll mention is Jennifer Haskamp, the applicant's or the landowner's representative, is in the audience tonight, and that we've also contacted the city of Medina. We've been in close contact with their administrator, their planner, and also the city of Orono, where the piece of property it does extend into the city of Orono as well.
Manager Miller?
Is this a first that we've done this? Engaged with a developer before they they started any planning and
Manager Miller, it's not a first, as I mentioned. We've done the Mater Wetland Bank with the city of Minnetrista, and we'll be meeting with the city and those landowners on Monday to explore a conservation subdivision that pulls more economic value out of the property for that landowner while achieving larger conservation objectives than if they'd have just followed the rules. And we've done proactive engagement with developers multiple times in the past. I just think this is a new track of getting better at it.
Other questions?
I would move approval.
second.
Motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thanks.
Agenda item 12.5 is the district administrator contract. Mr. Smith will lead us off on this, and Mr. Erdahl is with us this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Managers. I'm passing out one page, which is page 2 of the agreement. There's a highlighted small revision that I'll mention in a moment. Following the board's direction at the conclusion of the selection process, the board directed that Mr. Unmacht and I meet with Mr. Erdahl and develop an agreement that we could recommend as being one that meets Mr. Erdahl's needs as well as the interests of the district. Mr. Unmacht couldn't be here this evening, but has communicated his support for this agreement. We had a very workable meeting with Mr. Erdahl, worked with a template agreement that Mr. Unmacht presented to us, and we reviewed it from the district's legal perspective just to make sure that it aligned with similar agreements that the district has used in the past. There's a couple of features that I want to highlight for the board's attention. I think the first is that this would commence on February 9th. That's the date that Mr. Erdahl has indicated that he's available to begin. And then one of the key aspects of this agreement addresses the circumstances in which Mr. Erdahl is coming to the district. It was Mr. Unmacht's recommendation that we have a period of 12 months in which the administrator would only be dischargeable for cause, and after that 12 months would then go to be an at-will employee and eligible for severance. And the severance that Mr. Unmacht recommended was 6 months, which is the maximum allowable under the statute for public employees. And Mr. Unmacht's recommendation was based on a couple of things. One was that he felt that a 12-month period was a reasonable time for Mr. Erdahl to establish his role as a new administrator, and for the district to know, based on that experience, about the fit of the position to Mr. Erdahl's capabilities, and that after that time it would be appropriate to go to the normal situation of being at will. He also recommended the 6-month severance as something that he views as a standard now for most city managers and most public administrators, but for what he characterized as smaller entities. So we had some discussion about that, and that was his recommendation. We also then discussed the salary, and that was entirely the recommendation of Mr. Unmacht based upon his work with the district's compensation schedule, the range that was advertised and posted for this position, and where Mr. Erdahl's experience placed him. And I believe this is exactly in the middle of the range that was posted and advertised or identified in the compensation schedule. This also then provides for performance evaluation initially after 6 months and then annually thereafter. Provides for the traditional pension benefits, and places Mr. Erdahl with some credit for vacation hours and an experience level that I believe is placed at year 7 on the experience schedule, so that gives him some credit for his, I believe, 23 years prior experience with the Minnesota Zoo. And then I believe is a similar kind of banking and placement for sick leave and holidays. The next several provisions, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 are all really a standard district practice and fit with really the district's existing practices. I think the only other thing I want to point out then is paragraph or section 14. And again, this is written to be consistent with that plan of a 12-month period of initial period for which the administrator could only be discharged for cause, and that's defined in the agreement, and then reverting to at will thereafter. So during those first 12 months, there would be no provision for any severance benefit, because if you're only dischargeable for cause and you're not eligible for severance if you've been discharged for cause, so it only will kick in after 12 months. If you look at the second paragraph of section 14 in the version that I handed out, we're adding a language that clarifies this second paragraph really applies to what I would call constructive termination situations in which there is a reduction of salary beyond that, which is the general ratio that's applied for some scenario in which there's an overall reduction of across the board reduction. If there's some other issue or suggestion by the employer that the employee resign and the employee does so following that formal direction, that's also construed as a termination that makes you eligible for the severance benefit. So the point is of this paragraph that all kicks in after that first 12-month period. So we're clarifying that by inserting the words after February 18th, 2016. I mentioned that change to Mr. Erdahl, and he agreed that that was appropriate in the intention. I think with that, I've summarized the agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And Mr. Erdahl, I think, may want to answer whatever questions you have. I think he's also undertaken some work about developing a transition plan, and is prepared to speak to that as well.
I guess for the purposes of discussion, I'd like to move the passage of this contract. I'd also like to distribute this transition plan that Mr. Erdahl developed in concert with Mr. Unmacht and with our attorney.
Let me second the motion.
Okay. I was just going to pause there and let this be distributed.
And of course, the transition plan is something that will be somewhat fluid, I'm sure, that as Mr. Erdahl gets to work and the workflow begins to come in, there may be things that will change slightly in this plan as well. There's a motion and second. Is there any discussion? Manager Olson?
I would like to better understand paragraph 6, the 160 hours. Could you elaborate what that is telling me?
Mr. Smith?
Yep. Madam Chair, Manager Olson, that was a placement of a vacation benefit at a rate that's based on a 7th year of experience with the district. And so that's, pegging Mr. Erdahl at that level of seniority in the existing district schedule. And that was done, really a discussion between Mr. Erdahl and Mr. Unmacht about where his experience level fit coming into the district's.
So is that 6 weeks of vacation? It's the 160 plus the 80?
Well, it would be starting with a credit of 60, and then he would be accruing it at a rate. So
starting with a credit of 80.
Starting with a bank of 80 hours.
80, okay. 2 weeks. Yep. You said 60. That's
Sorry.
what I'm saying. Okay.
80. And then it would begin to accrue at this rate placed at the 7th year, and that does amount to 160 hours per year. There's also a cap on, as you know, for vacation hours. I think it's 240 that you can bank and carry forward from year to year.
Okay, so it's cumulative, it's 80 plus 160, and there's your 240, okay.
Any other questions? Manager Blixt?
I didn't have a question, I just had to make a comment, because I just have to say that, I'm just gonna go on the record to say that I'm going to be opposed to, and I'm not gonna vote for the, although I'm fully aware that the majority is going to support this, but my concern is that we are being asked to put in place, without the opportunity for putting somebody on probation, a person that, while he may be qualified, he still does not have any experience in local government, doesn't have any experience in water resources or natural resources management, or experience working for a board and managing a board, and to put somebody in a position where we're not going to be able to change anything with regards to his position for a minimum of a year, and then at the same time we're asking our staff to then bear the burden of training him in when they're already burdened with a lot of other responsibilities. So I think it's a lot to ask, and it's of them, and you're putting any future board members in a position that might not be tenable to them as well. So, I'm fully aware that you intend to do this, and why you intend to do this, and I wish you would just say on the record why you intend to do it. But I'm just saying, I think it's bad policy and bad responsibility on your part to go forward in this manner.
Madam President,
Manager Miller?
he is on probation for a year. You know, we got a right to terminate him in a year. So what's your point? 6 months or a year?
Typically, you do 6 months.
Well, we're not doing it typically this way.
That's what I'm saying.
I think that we have a sophisticated and experienced person, and we've got a professional staff that reports to him that's capable of giving him whatever assistance he needs. I doubt if he needs much to manage this organization with his experience and background. I think that the comments would seem to indicate a greater fear than we need to express, because no matter who we hired, it would be a concern about how the outcome is going to come.
Absolutely.
You know, so.
No matter who we hired, I would say the same thing.
Mhm.
You know, that it should be a 6-month probation.
Manager Shackleton?
Excuse me, your comments are very consistent with everything you've set up through this whole process, starting September, and that is fair. I will say that as you were part of our working group, it was rigorous. It was, I'm glad I didn't apply for the job. It was exhausting. The level of questioning and of back and forth that every candidate went through was impressive. I was happy with all 4 of them. I think this is our best choice. You're right, he doesn't have the depth of experience with local government that maybe others could have had. And I think, from my perspective, that skill is less valuable than an ability to manage a big budget, manage really capable staff who have been engaged through the last 8 to 9 months in our communities, doing good work with a temporary interim administrator, somebody who was not familiar with our district, somebody who did have similar experiences in managing big budgets and big organizations. And while Mr. Sparks was extremely capable, his background in science and background in communication and background in the environment is not as deep as Mr. Erdahl's. To that end, I think he will do as well as Mr. Sparks, if not better. But I think we need to give him a chance to figure this out. At the last meeting where we voted on this, you made it clear that you thought we should wait until there was a new board. And I don't want to play those political games. And I was very happy to see the clause that extend things out to a year, because that gives Mr. Erdahl enough time to demonstrate to us that he has the ability to function with this organization and with our board. And if this is not working in 1 year, I will gladly make the motion to move forward and find somebody else. But I think 1 year is more than appropriate given everything that's happened in the last year.
I may add that I never met Mr. Erdahl. The second time I shook hands with him is tonight when he was walking in. But I have checked with what I consider thought leaders in the district, and nothing but incredibly positive response. And I'm in a profile that I think would be proud to have representing us and managing staff and leading the district.
I will be voting for this contract, and I'm very happy to do so. It is the process of the selection process we went through brought the candidates up to this point, and Mr. Erdahl's reputation and experience, his resume, tell me that he can do this. But I also know that Mr. Unlocked will be on hand. We will have performance reviews. We will be very careful in going forward. I don't anticipate any difficulty, but we do have a transition plan. It will be very good communication, and I have no problem believing that the orientation will go very well, learning the district. I also think that a year is a very short time in the life of an agency, and for us, it's kind of the free thought cycle, coming around. So I think that 1 year there would not be less time to know how well Mr. Erdahl will do than 1 year. Manager Gasol?
Yeah, I was part of the working group on this with Manager Blix and Manager Shackleton, and spent 2 full days interviewing candidates, and had read hundreds of pages of resumes, and I thought we had some excellent candidates. There was no second tier about any of them, and Mr. Erdahl was my first choice of all those excellent candidates, and my second choice was the gentleman from Wisconsin, who had all of the criteria that you mentioned, Manager Blix, and I chose Mr. Erdahl for a variety of reasons, not because there wasn't someone who had all of those other qualifications. I'm not sure about your comment about the staff being burdened. My understanding from staff that have talked to me is that they're quite excited. None of them has expressed anything even remotely close to their being burdened. They're expressed nothing but excitement about this transition. So I'm looking forward to this, and like Mr. Miller, I've had many people make comments to me that they were very pleased with our selection for a variety of reasons, none of them having to do what's gone on here in the last year. So I wholeheartedly support this choice.
Are there other comments? Manager Shackleton, did you want to say something?
Pam and Jeff, I just want to thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody else on this board. We started this in September with by establishing this working group, and it has been challenging, it's been emotional for all of us. And that should be acknowledged. And all of us through the interview process were engaged, and I think that demonstrates a commitment to this organization and to our mission. And to that end, I just want to thank everybody.
Do a roll call?
Very well. There's been a request for a roll call vote, Mr. Smith.
Manager Olson?
Nate?
Manager Casal?
Aye.
Manager Blixt?
Nay.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Shackleton?
Aye.
Manager Calkins?
Opposed.
President White?
Yes.
4-3.
Welcome, Mr. Rudolph.
Well, kind of welcome, you know. 4 out of 7 welcome.
Did you want to
Yeah.
come forward, or?
Sure. I just wanted to thank you for the process and the trust that you've placed in me, to all of you, because I'm looking forward to continuing the tradition of excellence in leadership and stewardship for the Watershed District. And working with the staff that I've started to get to know a little bit, and look forward to engaging with them more, and with all of you as individuals and as a group more too. And I hope that I can continue to not only maintain and earn trust, but grow that over the coming years. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the challenges ahead, and I hope that we can reach a better opportunities to kind of work together and collaborate more efficiently and effectively in the future. So thank you.
Well,
Item 13.1 is the 2004 flood report. Ms. Shopwood.
Madam President, managers, tonight I'm going to discuss the 2014 flood report. A little bit of brief history. I provided the board an update in June of last year, kind of in the midst of the flooding. At that point, we discussed items that potentially could be included in the flood report, and also pointed out additional information and data that we were gathering for inclusion in the 2014 flood report. In September, the board approved a contract with Wank Associates to assist in performing a stream assessment to identify flood damage, and also to assist in preparation of the flood report itself. In November, I provided the board an update on the stream assessment and the damages that were identified, and a pretty detailed summary on the FEMA process itself. And in December, I provided the board a status update on this flood report itself. So tonight, I'm going to present the draft report and a very brief high-level overview of what's within the report itself. If there are any questions or additional items that any of you feel should be added to the report, you can provide those at the end of my presentation, or as always, feel free to provide me an email and lay out those details as well. So I just want to start off with saying that the district has never experienced a year like we did in 2014. And therefore, we've never produced a report such as this. That being said, I just want to note that I am very proud of everybody that's helped contribute to the report. It was an all-staff effort, and although 2014 was, a bit of a challenging year, it was a really productive year. I mean, in the report itself, all the information and data that we've gathered is impressive and will only serve to benefit the district moving forward. So the 2014 port report documents the extent of the flooding. It looks at all the impacts across all the departments at the district. What was the response from each department? And then, as discussed at the board update in December, the main kind of role for the report moving forward will be utilizing it to inform a response plan, which will then help the district be better prepared for next time. I wanted to hit on this main map that we produced and kind of discuss a little bit briefly on what it all shows. So the goal of this map was to provide kind of a summary of all the data that's in the report in one place. All the lakes that are noted in red is where new high-level water records were recorded in 2014. There were 16 total. Although the dots, the purple, yellow, and red, were information that we gathered through coordination and data seeking from cities. Red sections of the creeks are where we identified major flood damage and are coordinating those repairs with FEMA. Any places where you see the green cross sign is where district staff recorded new flood flow records. And then the orange triangle signifies cost share inquiries that have come in related to flood damage itself. And things that I do plan, after reviewing this map, do want to add some items to it to make it a bit more inclusive, and that would be adding all the permit information that the district, evaluated and approved. So the emergency riprap permits, or the emergency permits, high water riprap permits, and any floodplain permits. So I'm not going to go into the details of the report itself. It's a bit technical, and would welcome you to sit down and enjoy the reading. But I do want to provide what I thought in reviewing it and writing it were the key findings from the report. Record precipitation. January 1st to June 30th, 2014 was the all-time wettest time frame for that period since 1871 when records began. So the wettest we've had. June itself was the second wettest year on record, and the June 19th storm that we noted many times throughout the report was the sixth wettest storm that the Twin Cities area received. So just kind of looking at that just at a high level, you can understand the impacts that the district received. Those led to, as I noted, 16 lakes reaching an all-time high. We had many creeks reach new flow records, and also above their 100-year records. We had several lakes and creeks reach above their 100-year flows, comparing to the XP Swim modeling. Issue that's near and dear to my heart is dam operations. Dam operations were not a factor in the flooding this year. The report analyzes this in depth and identifies that the McGinty Road culvert was actually a controlling structure. So once the dam and overflow weir became submerged, which lasted approximately 40 days, we were at control of the McGinty Road culvert. Sanitary discharges, in total they represented less than 1% of the total annual loading, so not as a significant impact to the whole system. I noted in December during my update that district projects were very resilient to high water. Existing and established projects such as the Reach 8 Minnehaha Creek Stabilization Project, the work that was done by the district below Minnehaha Falls held up well. Active projects were the Reach 20 project, Reach 14 and Big Island did encounter a little bit of damage, and that was mainly because they are in their establishment period and weren't quite had the vegetation fully established. FEMA coordination has resulted in $1.2 million in federal and state money leveraged. Yesterday I did get the final approval for a last project worksheet with FEMA, so we do have approximately $1.2 million that's been designated, and the state allotment of money was approved by the governor on Tuesday. So we have 75% of the $1.2 million coming from the federal government and the other 25% coming from the state. The
flooding also enabled us to catalyze partnership opportunities. The big one this year was establishing our partnership with Hennepin County Emergency Management, the National Weather Service to help us get detailed forecasts, and the USGS to implement the lake gauge in Minnetonka, which was approved tonight. The district's role is also identified this year as one that was most useful and added most value to the community through data collection and communication. In the report, it was noted that the district's homepage was visited, I think, over 50,000 times between June and August of this year, and that.
I did it about 1,000 times.
And comparing that, that was more than quadrupled for the same time frame from last year, and more than 7 times more than 2012 for the same time frame. So people really, utilize the district for kind of the go-to for information. And the last thing, which was also hit on in the update in December, was that the main utilization of this report is the development of a response plan. This year, we responded kind of ad lib and ad hoc, and it worked, but really understanding the, success of having a response plan and knowing what each department and the district's role should be moving forward. So moving on from the key findings, there were opportunities that the flooding did create, so I just wanted to document those. We were able to document high water elevations higher than we've ever had before. So we have information that we can use to calibrate models, to plan future projects, and aerial photos as well, which are key as a good communication tool moving forward. We refined the district's role. Really, the high water, forced us to do this. We identified it as I stated previously, to be the coordinator, to help with the long-term planning, and not necessarily be implementing and funding street repairs or sanitary sewer repairs. Educational messaging, our education and communications department really realized the importance of what happened this year, and are on the back end of it really trying to seize that opportunity since it's still fresh in people's memory. And department self-evaluation refinement. I remember I pulled together a meeting from all the departments in the peak of the flooding and kind of just assessed with everybody what was working, what wasn't working, what are we, where are we maybe missing opportunities, where do we need to refine our operating procedures. So that was a big thing for everyone, all the departments this year, on what we can do better and add more value to the residents next time. And hit on this already, relations developed, again, with local communities and government units. And a bit of a nerdy thing is developing a rating curve for McGinty Road. So again, acting as a control structure, we had to go out, we installed a wet well, which provided us, I think, readings every 15 minutes, and then we go out and measure flow. So in the report, it discusses that we were able to get a rating curve close to 1, which means that it's very accurate. So now what we can do for future flooding events is simply go out to McGinty Road, put a tape down measure in, measure the water level, and we know what the flow is. So that saves a lot of time and a lot of money for district staff. So lastly, we discussed this in detail in December, but the flood report will inform a future flood response plan. This will define the district's role during the event and after the event. It'll be used to translate a good chunk of the report, which was each department's response during the event, and help hone those in and identify what each department should be responsible for the next event. And lastly, coordinating that response plan with Hennepin County Emergency Management. They're in the process of updating their hazard mitigation plan, and I have a meeting with them in a couple weeks to discuss their plan, and then also help them, or have them assist us in developing our own response plan. So with that, the report doesn't necessarily need to be approved, but it does need to be finalized. So then the board can accept it. So with that, I can take any questions.
Manager Miller.
First of all, I'm very impressed, not only with the report, but the work that was done during the flooding. It was very clear that everybody was working very, very hard to be of help to the communities, and they provided great assistance. What is the plan for distributing this to the appropriate people in local cities to have it as a resource for future flooding?
Manager Miller, managers. My thought for that was I was going to sit down with, as I said, Hennepin County Emergency Management and to see if there's any additional information that they think would be valuable for communities to use, and then take that and refine the plan and probably cut out the department section of the report and just provide more of that upfront level data and impacts for communities so they can understand from our end where we got a lot of data and can share that with them moving forward.
Mr. Whisker?
President White, Manager Miller, managers, one of the things that Tiffany and I have discussed is working also with the communications department to produce publications similar to the mid-year report or annual report, something that's an executive summary that we can distribute, defining a role for policymakers, quantifying the event, the impacts to the resources, and I think that's a good communications tool so people out in the community understand that the role the district can play and sort of can't play and what happened this year and what we plan on doing next time. So I think the meat of the document can be distributed to communities as a good reference, but we also want to produce a higher level summary that we can distribute for folks too.
One other question.
Manager Miller?
Do you have a list of all the addresses that were impacted?
Bingo.
Manager Miller, yeah, we do. We sent out questionnaires to cities. The one map, I believe it's map 3 in your report, summarizes details down to like where the city streets were, where there was damage. So we did put together a table in the report that summarizes a little bit more detailed example of where the damage was and what it was specifically. For the cost share inquiries, we do have exact addresses. It's kind of a moving set of information. Cities are still kind of providing information as it's coming in, so we can refine that even further.
Manager Olson?
Yeah, what I would like to be able to do is say how many homes were damaged. You know, and someone says when the water was really high that summer of 14, how many homes were impacted? Because I look at FEMA at 1.2 million, that's nothing. I mean, to me, that means we didn't have a problem.
Those are natural resource impacts versus structural damage and the monies that the communities are claiming. So that's one of the reasons to go to Hennepin County and pull those.
Right, that's my point. Because was it 1,000 homes? Was it 200 homes? Was it 8? You know, I know 2.
Yeah.
But it would be very interesting to see just how many people built property that got damaged within that flood level.
Yeah, manager, also managers, exactly to James' point. That's kind of one of my main reasons is going to the county because they're accumulating all this information for people that were claiming things at FEMA. And just to clarify, that $1.2 million was just a district infrastructure, so our district streets.
I understand that.
Not the private property.
Mr. Whisker, do you want to add something?
Just as maybe a segue to the next item, the Zumber Ridge Homeowners Association alone, I mean, this is their purported damages was $400,000 compared to our 1.2 in infrastructure. I think so. It's going to be a pretty big number when we get that from everybody.
Yeah, I know, understand. Thanks.
Manager Blixt.
So, Tiffany, in that 1.2, I'm imagining that doesn't include any of our staff costs?
Manager Blixt, managers, actually it does include staff costs. There was, it accounts for FEMA reimburses for direct administrative costs. So anytime that went into identifying flood damage is reimbursable and was included in that.
But the cost because this report that you put together is incredibly comprehensive and represents a huge amount of work on your part or a lot of people's part. And there's a lot of other work that you've done, I think, that probably isn't reflective anywhere. And I'm just wondering, how would we tally up our full cost of that our staff have put into responding to and reporting on this incident?
Manager Blix, managers, that is something that I have on my to-do list. It was hit on a little bit throughout the department section, but I have been refining that and actually refining specific costs within, I think, that front page I put, I think, 77,000 costs to date. So breaking out what was spent on, engineering, legal, additional equipment purchase, etc. So in the final report, I do intend to actually break those out.
Oh, great, that would be super. Otherwise, the report is really,
This
great.
report was requested by the board. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know if we can assess that to anybody else, but.
No, but it's important for us to just be aware of the total cost for all of our staff's work overall in this.
I do have one more question. If we were to have the same volume of rain this spring, would it be fair to expect the exact same results? In other words, if we have this repeating, because we know the storms are more frequent, and we know the water is more intense, and is anything changed, or would everything happen the same way?
Manager Olson, managers, I can try to answer that. I don't know if Chris can add anything. I think the uniqueness of last year was we had a really late snowpack. We had a late ice out on Lake Minnetonka, and as soon as the ice went out, it didn't stop raining. So to answer your question, if when the weather repeats itself, then yes. But right now we're sitting a foot behind on snow predictions, and there isn't any major snowstorms anticipated for the next 2 weeks. So I guess that's the one difference this year, but.
I have this vision that our staff is back there with a big funnel and a smaller funnel and a smaller funnel.
And you also have a graph in here that says that there's less, the water level in 2013 was higher than the water level was in 2014 in November.
Yeah, create more storage.
Oh, for storage.
Yeah.
So more storage in this.
Manager Calkins, you had it? Go ahead.
I guess to me, there's a lot of good information in the report, and I think while it was a bad opportunity, it was still an opportunity to learn a lot about the district. And I keep coming back to the H&H model for a variety of reasons, but one of them is, and it kind of ties in with the question that Manager Olson just asked, and that's if the same thing were to happen, would we get the same result? And the model should be able to answer that question. So my impression has been that the model has been kind of neglected since it was put in place, and I could be wrong on that. But I think it is important that we use this information to take a look at the model and find out, number one, if it would have predicted this, and where it would have been right and where it would have been wrong. I think that's very important. And then I think the other reality is that the damage that's done to district infrastructure is a cost. We don't want, and we've learned some things about that, and hopefully we can improve project moving ahead to reduce the potential for damage. But I do think that the report should be comprehensive, and then it gathers some of the other information that's been mentioned to show really what was the damage that occurred in the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. And then out of that, the most important question is, how does it affect planning? And I know you had a bullet on that of long-term planning within the district, but I'm still a little bit unsure as to really what that would be. And I think those kinds of outcomes are important, especially as a part of the comprehensive planning. So I would like to see a little bit more detail as far as where this takes us, what the district would be doing in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is for the different things that the district might do. Because that, to me, is the ultimate question for property owners in the district. If somebody's house was flooded yeah, they should have had flood insurance, but that doesn't make them feel any better now. And so the question is what kinds of things, if there are any, I don't know the answer to that, what kinds of things might the district be doing to prevent those kinds of things from happening in the future? And I guess that would be a policy question for the board too, is what responsibilities does the district have in that regard? So to me, that forward-looking, okay, this is what happened, this is what we did need to do now moving ahead, is probably the most critical part of the whole thing. To improve water management within the district. And it does come back to the issue of we're living in a district that is very impervious in much of it, and much of the flooding that happened was a result of that. So what can we be doing moving forward to potentially make that better, to slow water down? And that's a broken record for me, I know that, because there's a variety of reasons that I think it's important for us to be slowing water down within the district. And I think that this is one of them. So that's, I guess, if I have a concern, those are the primary concerns I have. I think the public would be interested in the answers to those questions as well.
Thank you, Manager Calkins. We'll do our best to address those and include them in the final draft.
Manager Shackleton?
Oh, good.
Are you going to?
Manager, to answer Manager Calkins' question about the modeling, the district was actually approached by the DNR in regards to evaluating the modeling versus the data we collected as part of the flood response, and they actually have grants that they would like the district to go forward with to help address kind of those comments of what does the model output say if we run 2014 on it based on where they actually saw flooding in houses flooded. So the district is actually going to be engaging the DNR as part of their work plan to help do that modeling and do that analysis. So you can see on a spatial layout where it was and maybe where the modeling is off, as they are kind of the FEMA keeper of the flood insurance model. So I know that's something we'll be looking to move forward with.
Great. Thank you.
Another sore spot.
Manager Miller?
I don't have
A couple of comments I would make. First of all, globally, this is a remarkable amount of information, and it shows great coordination with departments and great effort on your particular part. And you made the comment about ad hoc. And as I read this report, and I give it quite a bit of attention, I was struck with a number of times that staff came up with a way to do it that will sort of be codified now going forward, tweaked, but a lot of it you figured out on the fly, and that was remarkable. Not on the fly, because you're all pros. That's the wrong language, but you figured it out as you went along. I was really impressed with that. And with the amount of information that we kept getting, either in board meeting briefings or email or on the website. I did have one little comment about the recommended future procedures talks about protocol for emergency permits. And it just reminded me that sometimes we see different permits and we don't see others, and it should incorporate, I don't think you need to be backstopped by the board, but sometimes reporting to the board about the emergency permits that are issued. I don't see how it could be emergency and still have to come back to the board, but some reporting there is all I would think. And then I did notice too that there's reference to incorporating what we learned from this into comprehensive, on the comp plan planning process, so that will become part of what we do going forward. Terrific report.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should we, council, should we have a motion to accept this report so it's permanent file, you know?
It's still a draft.
It's a,
Is it,
yeah.
is it draft?
It's still draft, yeah.
Madam Chair, Manager Miller, I think when it is finalized, it is appropriate to have the board acknowledge through a motion that it's reviewed the report and accepted it. So, at the right
So
time.
people can find it later, and, you know.
The next discussion item is the Zumbra Ridge Homeowners Association. Mr. Lister.
President White, managers, I think that last presentation is a good segue into this item and gets at some of the questions Manager Calkins was asking on sort of more of a local scale. Included in your packet is a letter from the president of the Zumber Ridge Homeowners Association that was addressed to Manager Olson, a couple of the Carver County commissioners, the mayor of Victoria, and the director of natural resources for Three Rivers Park District. And the letter, if you've read it, is really in regards to the high water in the middle of this year and some of the damage that happened to some of the single-family homes that are occupied on the north side of Zumber Lake. And there was a meeting out in the middle of 2014 between the agencies I just mentioned, which is why the letter is addressed to everybody, Three Rivers, Carver County, Victoria, and the Watershed District. And consistent with the role that Tiffany highlighted for the district with regards to flooding, we help coordinate the meeting and disseminate information, but we weren't positioned to provide any sort of flood response or disaster relief or do any sort of emergency work. The City of Victoria provided sandbags, Carver County played a role, and one of the things I believe that was discussed on site was the potential role for the district long-term to essentially budget for a study, do some long-range planning, and that's really what the letter highlights. There's a reference in there to the district on site voicing support for such a study in the future, and that's what the letter's asking for. So in response to the letter on Monday, district staff coordinated a conference call between all the agencies, and I believe the Carver County commissioners may have already issued a response letter this week just saying they're looking into it and they're coordinating. But that group of staff discussed the value in clear and coordinated response so that everybody wasn't responding individually. And no surprise, generally, the group supported the district's role, not necessarily as a lead agency, is one of the things I clarified, but not as a lead agency responsible for solving the problem, but as a coordinator and a collector of information and diagnosing what the issues are, highlighting what the potential solutions are, and what are the ways to implement those solutions. What's the right agency, private sector makeup to actually get something done. So I spent some time since Monday working with the district engineer, Chris Meehan, and we've talked about a possible role that the district could play in terms of historically evaluating lake level management for Zumbra. If you've read the letter or if you read the memo, there's a lot of history here. There's been flooding out here since the 60s. Historically, there was no outlet. There was a ditch channel that later had to be filled in. The outlet that people perceive as an outlet really isn't one. It's connected to Sunny Lake downstream, and they're part of the same lake and operate at the same level. So the outlet's actually further down. It's County Road 11. So looking at the history and capturing that all in one place, there's a lot of letters back and forth between the DNR and the city about building homes in the floodplain, and there's basements on some of these homes that are actually below the OHW. So capturing all that in one place would be one task. Then doing the modeling, the H&H modeling that Manager Calkins referenced, the hydraulic modeling, to figure out next time an event like this happens, will the same thing happen to these homes and how do we prevent it would be the second piece. And then you put those together and you look at what is the flood management solution. It may or may not be revision to an outlet structure. That's something that the DNR has authority over, so we'd have to coordinate there. It might be some other floodplain strategy. And we'd have to do that in a manner that's coordinated with all the agencies we just mentioned and other regulatory authorities. And the idea would be that we compile that in a technical memo and then have some meetings, a kickoff meeting with the residents that the city's agreed to facilitate at City Hall, and then outline this and then come back with a finished report and say, here's some options and here's a path forward. Chris had given me an estimate to do that work of about $8,900, and so if that's something that makes sense for the district to participate in from the board's perspective, I would look for a motion or direction to implement a work order and a contract with WANC for an amount not to exceed $10,000, just to give us a little bit of room there if there's more meetings needed, that kind of thing.
Manager Olson?
Yeah, when I was first asked to go out and take a look at this, we had Mike Panzer and several of our staff, as well as the county commissioners and the city people and the mayor. And at that time, the decision was made to have the city take over the sandbagging operations because they had planned for it, frankly. and that the DNR, we did make calls, and the DNR did say, during this time of flooding, we are not going to alter any water. We're just going to let the water be where the water is. Solving their problem means somebody downstream gets their problem. So there's a lot to the original study that happened in the 60s, I believe, Mike Panzer's original company.
Yeah, Hickok was advised Three Rivers when they assumed ownership of that part of the park in the 70s.
In fact, both Hickok and Mike were honored this year by us as watershed heroes. We did see that report, and they do have some preliminary information where things have changed. We have a great big roundabout in that area. There's lots of ponds surrounding that roundabout where the stormwater now very quickly is stored and let go into Sunny. So Sunny now, instead of perceived as the drain point, now becomes higher and backflows back into this area where these homes are. So getting a better handle on what we really have to deal with was something that the county, the city, the residents are all asking for. So with that, I would move to accept that as a motion.
So the motion is for a 10,000 not to exceed for Rank to do analysis.
Correct.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next item, Manager Shackleton, is AIS legislation.
Yep. So on January 10th, there's an article in Star Tribune where Joel Carlson, our lobbyist, was quoted as saying, in an article about invasive species, everyone's concerned about this issue, but this is like taking a sledgehammer to an ant about a proposal that we advocate. And that night we agreed to direct Jeff Sparks to work out a plan with Joel. And yesterday, the DNR came out with a press release indicating that they are postponing the AIS training and trailer decal program. And there's an article in today's Star Tribune, the headline, Delayed Mandatory Invasive Species Training for Boaters. So Jeff is in Florida. I emailed him 2 days ago with something else and got a one-sentence reply. So I called Sherry this morning and I said, do you mind if I just reach out to Joel and see where things are at, especially given the fact that there is this headline, this headline today, and there are actually 2 bills.
Excuse me, what you're pointing out here is the conflict that our legislative representative has with our position versus another client.
Okay. Exactly. So he has 2. Thank you for clarifying. He has 2 clients. He has multiple clients, but he has the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District as well as the Congress of Minnesota Resorts. And there was a resort owner in the original article back on January 10th who was quoted taking a very firm position. And I talked with Joel, and he said, so there are a couple bills, and there are 2 bills that are authored by the same person in the House of Representatives that just repeal the law. And one bill, the first bill that was introduced has a Republican Senate author. The second bill that was introduced, the Senate author is the DFL chairman of the Environment Committee. So, and as Joel pointed out, one of those 2 bills will be heard in the Senate Environment Committee. It's probably going to be the one that's authored by the Senate Environment Chair. And Senator Tomassoni has indicated that he has signed on to this bill to keep the process moving, but has an opinion that differs from the House author. To that point, Joel said, my intention is to advocate the watershed district's plan. He has talked with the different lobbyists who represents some other resort folks. That lobbyist would take on the representing of the Congress of Minnesota Resorts. So in the event that the Congress of Minnesota Resorts takes a position, which to your point, when we last discussed this, they had not. And I sent him a copy of our draft minutes. so he was able to kind of see what the context for our discussion. They do not have a position, but if they do take a position that is in support of the Republican position, the House position, which is to delete the bill, the language, he would cede that one issue to that other lobbyist while that issue is hot. And he also indicated that he would want a watershed lobbyist to be with him in any meetings where either strategy or legislative tactics are discussed. He said, I would want Ray Bone as lobbyist for MAUD to be in the room. And if you guys, meaning us, wanted him to, he would recommend another lobbyist who could take on watershed issues to be with him as kind of a second lobbyist. In essence, a guarantor for our purposes that he is actually advocating our position in any negotiations. So that is how we left the conversation. He did have he had the name of a person in mind for that ultimate idea. It was not a proposal. He said he was comfortable going in with Ray Bone, but for added convenience, he offered that.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton. Manager Miller?
I have no problem with Joel Carlson's integrity. I'm sure he'd represent us as he proposed in the conversation with Manager Shackleton. However, I think the perception is kind of inappropriate that he can represent both sides of the issue, and just have somebody observe him. I think we got to have a better solution than that, because the watershed and any of our very active constituents have spent a great deal of time on this issue, and we can't. I don't think we can back off of supporting our constituents under the guise of accommodating our lobbyists. And I think we've got a bigger obligation to make it transparent and clear right now. So I won't support that proposal. That if he determines there's a problem, he will bring in Ray Bowen. That's not a good enough solution.
I'm not going to advocate right now. I'd like to kind of offer. I mean, I had a long conversation with him, and I'm going to offer what I think his response would be, and that's that the Congressman of Minnesota Resorts does not have a position on this, and that when they do take one, he would let us know. That is what he said to me.
Well, if I could.
Go ahead.
That's something that's, I have no doubt that he would do that, but I don't think the public or experienced observer or participant in the process would think that's good enough.
I have a question about timing. What is the timing?
Immediate.
When do we need to know?
I would offer that you never know with the legislative process. It'd be better to, I think, for our purposes, it'd be better for us to make a decision on the front end and create the structure so that we would have somebody, if we were to bring on a second lobbyist, the way it's structured is that every organization has if they have multiple lobbyists, there's a lead lobbyist, and that would be, in this case, it would be Joel, and then a secondary lobbyist would file, and they would be given a portfolio, so they're retained for a purpose.
Manager Casal?
Having read the articles and what it is that there seems to be some disagreement about, and what was mentioned was out-of-state boats traversing the state and not stopping, and carriers of new boats. Those are very simple things to be as amendments, which tells me that there's something more behind this if the bills that are being offered are to repeal the law. And given the extreme nature of that, I think an offer to maintain neutrality really isn't enough. That we needed an aggressive advocate to make sure the position of all the communities and the citizens that sweat still a lot of blood to get this legislation passed, that it just wouldn't be, well, we're trying to show that this party is being fair, because we need a very strong advocate for this, and neutrality isn't enough. So I would, even if someone is trying to be fair in that way, to go to become even an adversarial advocate for us would put that person in a very uncomfortable position with the other. And I think it's very hard to bifurcate the situation just with somebody watching over it. So I would really be supportive of really getting someone who knows this and has a stature to aggressively represent our position.
I would think there are a couple different tactics to how to achieve that. One would be to, since the coalition, the resorters, the group he represents,
Congress.
The Congress of Minnesota Resorts, since in Joel's, as Joel put it, they don't have a position. One way to go about it is for us to, one way to do it is for us to take a very firm position and direct him to be very aggressive. That could be one tactic.
Draw the other side out.
And force them to make a decision and force the whole process. Second thing could be to find another lobbyist to work this issue at the Capitol.
Manager Bliss, you have your hand up.
So, I know it's unusual, but I am going to agree with these two guys to a certain extent. And
Have I got the wrong position?
I know, really, what's going on. But let me, and the reason is that I too read the article, and I went and I saw Joel's comment, and I went, oh, that's not good, to myself. And I think the problem is that he has been so publicly identified with the other team, and it is because of that I think we are forced to have him help us find somebody else to run the ball. I love Joel and I totally trust him, but it is because he's taken that very public stance that it forces us, I think, to find somebody else.
I would like to just do that. I told Joel I would channel him, only because he can't make it here tonight.
Yeah.
And I'm really not advocating. And I said the exact same thing to him. And he said, it was taken on context. And he described me how.
Doesn't matter at this point.
I know. I mean, this is why I started the whole ball moving today. So we needed to act. If we're going to act, tonight was the night to act.
Well, let's make it really clear. The opponents of repealing this law are doing it under the guise of economic development. Well, the economic damage of repealing this law on major residential properties in our watershed is significant. The potential damage of invasive species. And we've got an obligation to our taxpayers to protect their economic interests, just as much as the resort owners are using this as a perception of economic development or economic preservation. I think we've got just equal amount of and we should be as strong as an advocate on the economic basis of protecting this law.
Jim or Bill, Manager Calkins.
You're right. The resort owners do not have an official position, but at this point need to have an official position because they have advocates who are pushing for repeal of the law. So they can stay in the weeds and not come out with a position unless it looks like it's in trouble. So I would agree, and I guess I'm maybe not going a step further, but I've said this for many years at this point, I don't think mod is it either.
No.
Because there's differing opinions within mod. So if Minnehaha Creek Watershed District believes that this is an important issue, and I happen to believe that it is, then I think the Watershed District needs to be out there and be aggressive and needs to be doing that now. And I'm a big believer in engaging the folks who may be on the opposite side of what the Watershed District might be. Rather than just saying, well, that's their stance and that's just the way it is. I think it's important for us to engage those folks, and I don't think that's happened at this point. So I would like to see the district be much more aggressive than it has been, and at the same time be engaging people who disagree with us. We tend too often to paint people into a corner, and we say, well, it's the anglers. Well, I've said this before. There are plenty of anglers out there who would be on the Watershed District side of this issue. So we don't want to pinhole any particular group and make them out to be the bad guys. I just think the district needs to be engaged. It has to have a position. The district needs to be engaged and it needs to be proactive. And the sooner we can do that, the better. And I think that goes to the top. I think we should be communicating our views of governor. I think it goes that far. If we really believe what we say, I think we should be doing that.
Thank you. Manager Olson, did you want to weigh in?
Well, there was a comment that was made that we could take a very firm stance, and if he accepts it, he'd have to be firm. Well, as upset as we would be if the opposite happened, if the other side asked him to take a very firm stance, we would be good. So the firmness of the stance, I don't know that would be acceptable, but I agree with Manager Miller's comments that because of that article and because of the publicity involved, it's just not our campaign.
So we're all agreed about what we want to do, right? We want to.
Oh, by the way, Ray just announced his retirement, so.
Well, in 4 years. We all want to have our advocate really speak for AIS prevention, et cetera. So it's just a process question at this point?
No, I think it's getting, I'm looking at Brian and Lewis to come back with a recommendation to engage somebody to represent the economic interest on invasive species, aquatic invasive species, protect the current law, if not enhance it.
Manager Kaufman.
Well, I think that's right. I think we need to be in contact with all of the legislators that are in the district. I'll be up there for the other groups lobbying. I think that we should be up there doing the same thing, talking to legislators about it, and this is our view, and this is why we think it's the right view. And again, that just comes down to being proactive.
And my comment about process was simply that Mr. Sparks is out of town. He and Mr. Carlson had some conversation but hadn't followed through. So if we want to act quickly, perhaps a suggestion that we ask Manager Shackleton to work with legal counsel and make this happen.
I'll move that. Second. And I really want to emphasize that I don't want to be caught in a situation where we're a bunch of environmental nerds on this issue. What we are is protecting the economic interests of those people on Lake Minnetonka, to be very specific.
Well, and the other lakes nearby.
And the other lakes, and because it has a direct and a measurable impact on the value of the properties on the water in the watershed. And I think that argument is just as strong as the perceived impact on resorts.
Manager Casal.
Yeah, when I saw the article, I sent a note over to Joe Snyder, and he was very aware of what was going on. And so I would, given he took a year off from his work to vote to this, literally worked full-time on this, I would just suggest that you engage him because he may know who the real excellent party to represent us might be.
Had you made a motion, Matt?
I did,
And I seconded it.
and council had a comment.
Louis?
Madam Chair, just a couple of clarifying questions, because it does, from the board's discussion, it sounds like time is of the essence. And so the other aspects of this motion, I think, need to be, whether it's authorizing legal counsel in consultation with the people you've identified to, in fact, select the lobbyist and have them retained through us, I guess. And I have some thoughts about who might be good for that, but I just want to be clear that that's your direction.
Yes.
And secondly, to communicate to Mr. Carlson that he's not working the issue anymore on our behalf.
Not working this issue, yeah, right, correct. That was my intent of the motion.
I just want to be clear about
Anybody-
both.
And that he'd be the lead, or he would still be the watershed's lead lobbyist.
Yeah, but
just
not
for-
on this issue. He has not been
Just to
involved.
clarify.
Yeah. And he should make it clear that he's not representing the whole. You know, there's appropriate ways they do this.
Manager Calton?
I think Manager Miller is right, and we all know that it is important to the taxpayers within our district, whether they live on water bodies or not. So that's very important. It's an economic issue, but it is also an environmental issue, which is tied to that. And as sad as it is, Lake Minnetonka, along with Mille Lacs, along with the Mississippi River, happen to be now some of the biggest threats to the rest of the lakes that are not infected within the state, with certain AIS throwing there. So I think that's another reason why we need to step up and say, we know that, unfortunately, we have these exotic species now. We want to do what we can to prevent others from having them.
We're bringing new ones in.
Good point, good point. Any further discussion before we vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Was that unanimous?
It was.
Okay.
It totally was.
Again.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton and Mr. Smith. The last item of business is election of officers. We have a motion and second to, we carried this forward earlier in the meeting when there were just 5 managers here. There was a motion and second to elect the current officers as a slate to re-elect them. Discussion?
Did you say there was a motion and a second?
There was. You and Manager Olson had not yet arrived, and so we set it back, but there was a motion to.
Well, then I'll weigh in that I would be willing to continue to be the secretary.
No, what was that?
I said that I would weigh in that I would concur with being willing to be nominated to retain secretary position.
Well, why don't we do it the way we normally do it? I move that I nominate.
Excuse me, we have a motion on the floor and a second on the table, I mean. There was a motion.
Did we table it?
Yes.
Huh,
I withdrew my motion.
You withdraw it?
No, I did at the beginning of the meeting.
I'm sorry, I overlooked that, thank you. So there is no motion.
Okay, I move that Manager White be nominated for president.
Are there other nominations for president? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Okay. A vice president, is there, I would
Just to be
nominate,
clear, that was 4 to 3.
it was. Are there nominations for vice president?
I nominate Manager Shackleton.
Are there other nominations for vice president? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Are there nominations for treasurer? I would nominate Manager Miller. Are there other nominations? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All in
Nay.
favor? Okay.
Is that
Alright.
6 to 1?
Are there nominations for secretary?
I'll nominate Manager Casal.
I'll second. Are there other nominations? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed.
Nay.
Is that 5 to 2?
Thank you very much. There is no other business before the board. We are adjourned.
Wait a minute, we have to.
Mr. Whisker,
Could I provide a brief update for the administrator's report?
certainly. Thank you.
I thought this would be timely. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board is holding another suite of public meetings on Monday to discuss Hiawatha Meadowbrook Golf Course. And last time they met, there were some things said that weren't entirely accurate. And so I wanted to follow up with the board and let them know that yesterday, district staff had a meeting with the Assistant Superintendent of Planning, Michael Schroeder, and Assistant Superintendent of Recreation, Nicholas Williams, to just coordinate and discuss what their planning process is, what their community engagement process is for the golf courses. And they expressed a strong desire to engage the district in a formal partnership on the planning of both courses for both Meadowbrook and Hiawatha. And we discussed through the course of the meeting the district's desire, if we are to engage, to be engaged proactively with clearly articulated goals and a formal and structured process, and not just reacting to plans that are being developed and being viewed as a funding sources. We want to be able to bring ideas to the table and thoroughly vet those ideas and be materially involved. So the park board staff is looking at drafting a framework for our review for what that would look like and the consultant distribution and who does what. And we'll be reconvening maybe weekly or every other week to try and keep things moving forward. And I'm sure that will come up on Monday. And so we also discussed the need to clearly coordinate communications and make sure that those communications are clearly conveyed to the public, so their communications folks are in touch with Telly, and really it's pretty simple. We're having conversations, so there shouldn't be any more representation about formal partnership in existence or what we are or we aren't going to do. We're just talking about opportunities for us to be engaged and how we might add value. Two other items. We have a memorandum of understanding with Park Nicollet, and we continue to discuss their long-term desires to be more flood resilient. And it recently came up during conversations with them that they're going to be upgrading a bunch of their operating rooms, and so they're going to be pursuing modification to a part of the structure out there that is near the loading docks where they had the bulk of the flooding. So they're going to need permits and building permits. We had a recent coordination meeting with the City of St. Louis Park, and the permits are probably going to be administrative in nature. It's a small expansion of their existing footprint out into the parking lot. No impact to the floodplain really. But I wanted to keep you informed so that if there is a staff approval of a permit, you see them building out there, you know what's going on. That obviously be months from now. And the last thing is Bowser announced their Clean Water Legacy Grants, and the district received $40,000 for Mud Lake for flood analysis and pollutant load analysis that was identified as a need in the 6 Mile diagnostic study. Several projects or partnerships that we sponsored also received funding, and we can get that email out to members of the board that haven't already seen it.
Mud Lake is down from Pearson.
Yeah, Mud and Parley are the last two lakes before it goes to Halstead. And in the 6 Mile diagnostic, the St. Bonifacius watershed was identified as having some flooding issues out of this year. And also there's an unknown contributor of pollutants coming into that part of the 6 Mile system. So we applied for a diagnostic grant, and that's the one we received.
I guess I didn't know there was a St. Bonnie watershed. Meadowbrook, you said they're going to be doing, they're hoping to do some work back by the loading dock. They want to.
Park Nicollet.
This is what I meant to say, sorry.
Yeah.
What do they want to do?
So inside the existing structure, they've got older operating rooms. They want to go vertical and upgrade operating rooms and also create more private patient care. You know, people are sharing rooms in that part of the hospital. As part of doing that, there would be sort of an overhang in the loading dock area, and they're working with their construction advisor to basically be bumping out 10 or 20 feet. In the loading dock area where they've had flooding, I mean, there's not a huge change. I can get you plans. I mean, it's nothing that we would be concerned about from a regulatory perspective.
That's what I was looking at.
It's pavement now and it'll be building.
Pavement now, and it's pavement then. It's minor disturbance. It's probably maybe maybe 100 or 200 square foot encroachment into the floodplain, but they're creating a lot more storage by the way they're reconfiguring parking. And there's not a huge, the whole purpose of the MOU is to coordinate these type of things as they come up. And there's not an opportunity to sort of leverage this into some massive other reconfiguration, so.
Manager Olson.
Wanted to jump back to Mud Lake real quick. Does that funding do anything in response to your meetings that you've had with Crown College?
I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure. I think, you know, the city of St. Bonifacius, they've got some larger wetland complexes that come through the city where there's been some flooding, and they want to identify solutions to that. And there's also pollutant loading coming out of St. Bonnie into that part of Mud and the Parley system that we'd want to look at too. So that's a good point, though, something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Whisker, Manager Post?
No, not for him. Different thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
You were gonna have Mr. Bill report on his trip to Vegas.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Can you give us a report back on boat manufacturing?
It was incredible, and I'd like to prepare my notes,
Okay.
which are in a briefcase in my car right now.
Okay. Great.
But there were lots of manufacturers there. There were lots of AIS people there, the directors of Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado. It was amazing to hear each one of them talk about how thorough they are at their state borders and at every single lake that they have. They don't have very many. I mean, one whole state's got 162 lakes, and they put inspectors at every one of them. And so they were teaching the boat manufacturers that this is a big deal. And the more they can make their boats AIS proof, the more they're going to sell boats. Because nobody's going to want to go boating if they got to wait in the line and take a half a day every time they go to the lake. And lots of note-taking, lots of brainstorming. So I'll have results of what happened and I'll give a report, but it was tremendous.
Okay.
Huge group of people.
Manager Miller.
You know, does state law prevent us from doing anything stronger than what the legislature provides?
That sounds like a question, Mr. Smith.
Madam Chair, Manager Miller, the answer is it depends. There are some areas, especially when you're talking about exercise of regulatory authority and inspections, we have counseled that it's important first and foremost to ground those activities in your watershed plan and go through a process where you know that you have strong stakeholder support from local units of government who also feel that they have some role in the inspection process, so that you're on the strongest footing. So there are other respects in terms of the district's regulatory authority where you can adopt rules that are more clearly strict standards than state standards, and you have that in several areas. But in this specific area of, for example, inspection of watercraft before they enter water bodies, our counsel has been to develop, if you want to go down that path, develop a plan amendment that strengthens that. And I would say that the plan amendment that incorporated the EIS plan started that process, but the whole group and the whole focus of that amendment was to not use the regulatory inspection tools as much as the other tools.
Do we have any resorts in Lake Minnetonka? No. Is there?
Not that I'm aware of.
There's boat rentals, but
Yeah.
not a resort.
Okay. We should ask the AIS staff to examine that if the state law gets withdrawn, whether we've got authority and what kind of a program we could develop.
Manager Calkins?
We've already had those discussions. I mean, it's getting back to the Red Lake, Blue Lake, that whole issue. So we have discussed it in the past. We just haven't made any decisions relative to what the district might want to do.
Sounds like a committee discussion.
Yeah.
Manager Casal?
And to reiterate what Mr. Smith said, we did go down and came up with, go down the path and came up with a plan where we could use the regulatory authority with permits to do a boat inspection. As you pointed out, we decided to go another direction when we engaged the legislature. So if this is going to go the other way, that doesn't mean it can't be picked up that way, where we were, if in the end, the route we decided to take failed because the law was overturned. So that's a decision we have to make. But as he laid out, we've been down that path, as Mr. Coffin laid out, we've been down that path. We just chose to set it aside and pursue the legislative means statewide, and we were successful. Now that's threatened. What are we looking at here? Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Then now we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Make sure I keep reading. Finally get everybody trained around here. Don't stick something in front of me unless it's consistent. I don't care so much about the content. Just